Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Game Informer Show. I'm your host, Ben Hanson, joined by a couple of weirdos down at the end of the table. Jeff Marchiafava.
Hey!
Returning champion, like MacArthur to the Philippines.
Sure.
And then we have Reiner.
Hey, Hanson, shut the up.
Okay.
Whoa.
And then we have Ben Reeves.
Hey, why do you always start at the other end of the table? I'm sitting right next to you.
I don't know, because I like
always-
to work my way towards
Save the best
Yeah,
for last.
that's
is
the
that
cool
what
way.
you're saying? Okay.
That's it.
You get
Hey,
the camera switches. Yeah.
we've got a big show here. We've got a lot of games to cover. We're talking about Doom. Talking about Stellaris, basically the same game there.
What'd you say?
Stellaris?
Stellaris?
I know I think it's been off your radar. It's been off the office's radar a little bit, but that's why we have Ben Reeves here to talk about 4X stuff.
That's right. It's on
And
my
as
radar.
everybody knows, Jeff Marchiafava, the 4X's stand for.
Exploitation, extinction, extinguisher, fire, and extra read all about it.
There we go.
There you go.
And then after Stellaris, we're talking about Homefront, the Revolution. I want to talk a little bit about another revolution. And then after that, for the final segment, we are going to be talking to Ocean Quigley, which is one of the
You
best.
just made that up.
I did not. It's one of the best names in the video game industry.
It's a
But
Harry Potter name.
that's right. No, he spent 20 years inside Maxis, working his way up from the art department, and then eventually he was the creative director on like SimCity 2013, but he had a big role in Spore. So it's a long chat with him, and it's a great look inside the halls of Maxis and how that studio changed, and eventually what happened with SimCity 2013. He's very candid about what it was like inside that burning building when that game launched, because it was a bit of a mess, if you guys recall. And I also got to talk to him about like comparing Spore to No Man's Sky, what he thinks about that. And also my favorite topic, which is Maxis nude codes. So a lot of hot
right.
nudity talk if you're into that sort of
Just
thing.
take the blur off, and all you can see is their smooth Barbie skin.
That's right. The best skin.
The best skin of all around.
But
Let's move on.
speaking of skin, we should talk about Doom.
I like when Reeves grinds a conversation to a halt and then just throws the transition in for you at least.
Reiner, you've been playing the new Doom. You love it a lot. Ben Reeves, you've been playing it. I've played a decent chunk here. Matt Burt's reviewed it for us. He's not here. He gave it an 8.75. He was also in love with the single player campaign.
Yes. I think that's where all the praise begins and ends.
We'll
is
tell you
with
what.
the
Let's
single player campaign.
let's get the other parts out of the way.
Sure.
Multiplayer just seems it was made by a separate studio. Feels disconnected. It has loadouts. It has a bunch of stuff that's like, not really Doom.
It's fun. It kind of has that festive, really fast-paced arena shooter-esque kind of feel to it. But yeah, it doesn't really kind of have the same vibe of the single-player campaign. It's its own kind of team-based thing. I don't know. It's fun, but I don't see myself spending a lot of time with it. I don't know what you think of that, Ben.
I haven't dove into multiplayer quite yet, but I can't imagine I'll be as into it as I will the single player.
Hang on, I
Single
think
player's
Jeff
fun.
wants to laugh at you for some reason.
Dovin.
Dovin.
Dovin Keen. Did I say Dovin?
Yeah.
There's also Snap Maps, which is basically their approach to modding. It's basically the Time Splitters level creator embedded within this game.
Yeah,
More
I mean,
complex
that's-
version of it.
That's probably the best comparison there is in terms of it's easy to connect kind of these, I don't know, it's almost like connecting Lego blocks where you just have, here's an arena or here's a hallway. You connect those things together. It takes no time, but it seems like it's going to be really limited in creativity and what you can do in that space.
Well, we posted a test chamber showing off. We played like basically the top of the most popular list right now, and it's what you'd expect. It's like, hey, easy points, come in here. Nothing really too creative. Like every once in a while, like an arena where it's like, hey, try and
or a
survive
boss
this.
fight.
Yeah.
And there's some cool things you can do in there, like change the amount of health on enemies to create, kind of raid bosses if you want. Just make them super ridiculously hard. You could do it co-op. The single player, the campaign can't be played cooperatively, so this is your only space where you can play with friends.
In theory, you can remake all of Doom 1 and 2 and make it into like a remake or like a co-op experience.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. People are doing stuff like that.
If those pieces are there for you to play with, right?
Right.
So it's a lot of the stuff we went into in Snap Map had the same architecture. Like from room 1 to room 2, it felt very much the same because the pieces are limited at this point.
Yeah.
If they support it through DLC and add more stuff, which I think they probably will, it'll probably get a little better. But right now, it seems like people are really kind of struggling to come up with ideas in ways to make these things unique. Especially, I mean, Doom, if you go way back, was one of the most modded games, one of the most popular modded games.
Totally.
This doesn't give that freedom anymore. It's easier, anyone can do it, but you've kind of taken that creative aspect out of it for people to really make unique things.
I thought it was going to be like Super Mario Maker Doom. when I first heard about it.
It's-
But it
it's
sounds
not-
like it's not quite that diverse. Like there's not enough Lego pieces there yet.
Well,
to
it's like
really-
it's like Super Mario Maker. If people complained about not being able to put Doom skins on the blocks, I mean that's the thing. It's like everything will kind of look Doomish, but there's still a lot of flexibility within that creator. I think there is potential there, and it's so early. Maybe some trend will emerge, but you're not going to get the Simpsons skin or Chex Quest 2 coming out of this thing anytime soon.
No, I mean, or ever, right? They're not. They
Right.
haven't opened up the code for people to mess with. It's you got to use the pieces that are in there. So it's always going to look like Doom if they ever do.
until
open
the
that
Simpsons DLC.
That's right. But we should talk about the exciting part of Doom. I really loved it actually because it released on Friday last week. They did not send out code early, which is normally a bad sign. A lot of people have talked about it. And then over the weekend, you started to feel this momentum, and a lot of people tweeting, especially old school Doom fans, like, "Hey, is it just me, or is this fucking awesome?" So, what was your storyline of you playing the game, Reiner? When did you realize that you were in love with this new Doom?
I would say it's about an hour into it. You know, we went to id Software for the cover story on it, and we got to see some kind of levels from the middle of the campaign where it was just the action was very heightened at that point. So when the game started out, I was like, whoa, this is kind of slow. There's not a lot happening. It's really easy. I'm playing on the middle difficulty, which is, I think, hurt me plenty.
Just call it normal, you idiots.
Oh, come on. That's a holdover. People like that.
But yeah, I was a little worried. I was like, oh, did they really kind of nerf the difficulty on this and just really try to make it for casuals at this point or whatever? And then it just kicked into high gear, and when it's in high gear, that game is phenomenal.
What is the peak? What are you doing when you're having fun with this game?
You can never stop moving. That's the thing. That's the big takeaway from this is you got to kind of unlearn what you've learned over the last decade in shooters in that you find cover when you get hit. This one, it's like you got to just keep moving and hunting. And by hunting, I mean mowing down enemies to get health back. Because once you drop them, they're going to give you health.
There's a lot of basically fatalities in this game. What do you just the melee? It's a constant thing in the game. You're going up and ripping some dumb imp apart or stuff like that. Do you think that gets grading as you go on?
Kind of. There's two sides to it. There's the I'm in panic zone and I need to do a glory kill to get a lot of health back or ammo back. So you stun an enemy, you shoot them, they start flashing. When they're flashing, you can go in and execute them. And there's different zones on their body that trigger different executions. So if you're playing it right,
okay,
it's like hitting different buttons on a controller. If you're playing it in a fighting game, right? If you're playing it right, you're going to be doing all sorts of different executions. You're going to be doing jumping on their head to do the kind of takedown executions. You're going to get behind them to do different styled ones. But if you're in the moment,
act it out on Fava so we can better understand what you're doing.
but if you're in the heat of the moment, you're seeing the same one over and over and over a lot because you're not taking that extra split second to aim at their leg or whatever. You're just head, and you're constantly just breaking jaws.
Sounds like
gory
Jeff
as hell.
Weekend.
I mean, it is really violent. And I mean, these are demons from hell, right?
Yeah.
That you're taking down, and they are cowering in fear when you bring out like the chainsaw. Like they put their arms up, like, please don't hurt me. A demon from hell. By
I'm
the
like
way.
hurting me plenty.
See, this is that excitement is what fascinates me about Doom, and I've played a couple hours of this game. It's not doing it for me, but I don't want to be a downer. I refuse to be negative because I'm very happy that like the old school Doom fans. It seems to be the single player, at least, like everything that they wanted. And it is that enthusiasm. It's that feeling of like, I just love the metal music and I love seeing all this blood go over the place as I kill some demons. Like, I don't understand that at all.
Yeah.
But I'm super happy for those fans that they get this weird blast of nostalgia like that.
It is nostalgic through and through to the point of it does get a little grating, and like every level design is like find the blue key, find the red key, find the yellow key.
Yeah.
Even in hell, you're like, man, their new vision of hell, it was very cool looking, right? But at the same time, you're still doing the same thing over and over and over.
Satan loves locks. We all know
Apparently.
that.
You got to have security clearance.
I had
But-
one guy, I like passed by the yellow card key at one point. So then I ended up wandering around a level for like almost 20 minutes. Like, where did I miss this card key? Like, it's kind of like old school level design
Is that you're
I really
squinting?
miss.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is it fun?
So I had a similar experience to what Reiner described. Like the first hour, I'm kind of like, I don't know. Like it feels very old school where you, like you said, you're moving around a lot and you don't have to reload. You're picking up health items and no recharging health. And I was like, do I like this? Like I kept asking myself.
You don't
and
take
then,
out your little hand mirror.
Yeah, that's right. Looked myself in the eye. And then eventually something started to click and I'm like, you know what? I kind of enjoy this, like the way the combat moves and you just kind of encourage you to keep moving and the way you slowly unlock new weapons and face new enemies. Like it just changes the encounters to, I don't know. It's fun to keep moving.
There's this kind of moment of zen, very much like Tony Hawk when you're in the zone where you're chaining things together like combos so that you really start to feel like you have control over the battlefield no matter how many demons are there. And I mean, they just throw them at you. At the end, it's chaos. And the metal's just blaring. It's like Nine Inch Nails styled like music. I would never listen to the soundtrack on its own, but I think it's like one of the best soundtracks that accompanies action in a
Super
game.
appropriate. Okay.
Yeah, it really fits. Like if you ever pause that game, it's like heavy metal album shot every time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know. There's just something about that yes, the game becomes very repetitive, but whenever you hear that demon roar and then the heavy metal kick in, you're like, okay, awesome. I'm back in a combat situation here. And they last, toward the end of the game, they get longer and longer and longer. And it's just like, oh my God, like there's 50 guys in front of me, BFG.
Yeah.
I've heard people say that the campaign gets much more interesting later on, that there's some
It's
twists.
those combat arenas.
Okay.
Yeah, but the weapons. They do a nice job of introducing new weapons, giving you mods. Exploration comes into play. And this is one of the interesting parts of the game is there's a lot of first-person platforming, especially in the later half of the game with the double jumps, moving platforms, all that kind of stuff.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of verticality in it too, where I was like, wow, how tall is this one level? I'm going to say it's like 3/4 of the way through the game, and it's just like, it almost seems like an endless tower that you're going up, and if you fall, you're screwed. So there's some excitement there. It plays well.
done?
Yeah, it plays very well.
First-person platforming outside of Metroid Prime, I can't think of a good example of that.
Yeah, you rarely see the jumps that are like, you got to be, every centimeter counts. Like,
yeah, it's not pixel perfect or anything. I've noticed a few like platforming sections already just early on where I'm at. And it's actually, I think it's kind of fun. There's an occasional like death pit where if you don't make the jump, you die. But that's not super common because you can fall. I think you can fall as far as you want and not get hurt.
Yep.
So it's just if you fall into
Unless
lava
you fall
or
in lava,
something.
Yeah.
But it's very much like no run button because you move insanely fast already. And like I said, no reload. So it's just like an old school take on like if those original Doom games just kept developing along with the times without taking in like sensible like modern day shooter ideas. Like it's a very video game.
Ignoring everything sensible in the modern landscape.
Yeah, I mean, but in a sort of good way. Like it's very video gamey, but it's a lot of fun too.
It's just so rare to see like this much of like a throwback. It feels, I mean, I think Kickstarter's been doing a lot of this where it's like, hey, you like that old thing? Well, here's a new thing that's kind of like that old thing. But it's so weird to see it coming from the original developer so many years later. And who knows, Reiner, you might know, are there any original developers from Doom 1 on this project?
I don't think so.
Okay. But it's so weird to see it coming from it.
I think there might be a couple, but I don't think they're actually actively like programming or anything like that on the project.
Right.
But the weird thing about it, as retro as it is, it also feels like kind of a proof of concept of something new with these glory kills and the verticality that's kind of integrated into combat. Obviously, Doom, you never really had that.
Right.
It was a very flat game. So there's a bit of contrast there, and you can kind of see they struggle with that a little bit in figuring out what their game really is, which makes me excited if they do a sequel. Like if this game's successful, which it seems like it might be,
Yeah, it's selling well on Steam.
I think they really have a nice foundation to move on and really make something new and exciting.
I can't wait for Doom
Just
2.
hopefully they don't take 12 years again.
Yeah. I mean, that's another thing. Like this game was in development hell for so long, no pun intended, and to have it come out and have the community still rally around it in such a big way, it's exciting.
Well, hopefully, they feel that they found a formula that works now, so they don't have to like go back to square one again and again and again and try and figure that out.
And I guess it's almost similar to like the XCOM Enemy Unknown reboot or whatever you want to call that, where it's like you play it and it's like, well, of course, this is just like the original XCOM. It's great. And people play this and like, oh, of course, it's Doom in 2016. But I'm sure there's a million microscopic decisions that are super smart along the way to make it as successful as it is.
I think the one thing that they're going to run into is back in the day, we didn't really care if there was new enemies introduced in Doom 2 or whatever. You're just like, oh, yeah, cool, new levels. This is great. For a Doom 2 to come out now, you can't have all those same enemies again. Like it is basically all the enemies from the original Dooms reimagined, basically just brought into the new modern gaming landscape. So for them to be able to do that, they're going to have to, I don't know, go down another layer of hell or something, you know, like a whole new area that we haven't seen
Let me
before.
blow your mind, Reiner. Venus.
What?
Yeah, baby. I said it.
Yeah, why is hell on Mars?
It's red. I think it's as simple as that.
Okay.
Blood, red. It's a
Gotta go
planet.
somewhere.
Jeff, you're a big original Doom guy, right?
I guess to some extent, yeah.
Listen to that enthusiasm.
My God, it's like it's just heavy
I mean,
metal
I
music.
played it as a
enthusiasm
kid.
coming out of his mouth.
I'm nowhere near as good as the really good Doom players.
But
I have a great appreciation for it.
why haven't you checked out the new Doom yet?
Lots of games right now.
Okay.
I'm working on Uncharted, which we can't really talk about because we got the game club coming up.
Are
But
you going to join us for the game club?
yeah,
Oh, awesome. Yeah,
be
we
there.
should talk about that a little bit more later.
But it is, the campaign's like, I want to say 8 to 10 hours.
Okay.
And there is a bit of exploration that you can spend a little bit more time in. They have a lot of secrets in the game.
That's a cool
that are-
touch.
Yeah, that are worth picking up, not only in improving your character, which with mods and power-ups and stuff like that, but just little collectibles that are fun to find, like action figures that are kind of like, those Funko Pop figures that you find, but there's little animations every time you pick one up. So your guy picks it up, your Space Marine, it's a bobblehead of a Space Marine, and he like fist bumps it. There's just little fun things like that where you're
I
like,
love. There's a little bit of like
it's
the
just
old
fun
school,
to see that stuff.
the old school Doom music playing too when you like pick those up, which is kind of fun
Yep.
to hear that little like blare of classic Doom music.
So, from my own experience, it seems like you need to feel this as a throwback. You need to be nostalgic with that original Doom to enjoy it. Do you think that's
I don't think
fair?
so.
Okay.
I think the combat is just so much fun on its own, but if you have an appreciation of those old Dooms, you'll appreciate it
Yeah,
more.
you'll
to
love it even
see
more.
What they did fan service wise and kind of paying homage to what came before.
Yeah. Awesome. So, thumbs up.
Yeah, definitely thumbs up for single player. And then I would say Snap Map, we got to see what happens there. Right now, out of the gates, it doesn't look very good.
Yeah.
But then multiplayer, it's just, it's okay. There's much better options out there.
I would say Snap Map is conceptually still a solid idea.
Titillating.
Obviously, it's titillating.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's just, are people going to use it?
Yeah, for sure. Reeves, let's move to outer space or something.
Space.
Please.
Let's go to Mars.
Yeah, let's talk about Mars. No, you have been kind of bunkered away in the office.
Hiding.
It's true. We have this like VR room set up for Vive, and Reeves has been sitting in there, not using Vive, not experiencing the next big frontier in gaming, but sitting down for an old school.
Get these goggles off my head. And I threw them across the room. No,
Amazing.
somebody else was using our other PC, like gaming PC, so I used this one because nobody's using VR right now.
That's
Oh,
true. We might talk about that later in the questions and emails segment.
Uh-oh.
But you've been checking out Stellaris.
Right. Yeah. Stellaris, it's this 4X game. Came out kind of like out of nowhere, I want to say. I hadn't heard much about it beforehand, and then all of a sudden everybody's talking about it. But you're like Civilization, you start out as
Lincoln.
you start out as Abe
Space
Lincoln.
Lincoln.
You could. I was gonna say you start out as humans, but actually you can start out as any alien race you want. There's quite a diversity to like the character creator. So you can start out as cat people, or you can create like mushroom men, or you can create like lizard dudes.
this already
Connecting-
sounds amazing.
It sounds like Spore, which we're going to talk about later in the show with
Hey.
Ocean Quigley.
And then in traditional 4X, you just expand and try to take over the universe. And I was unoriginal. I started with humans at first, and but they were off-world humans, so they were
Oh.
people who had colonized another world.
Ooh,
And,
like were they more hardcore, like the Terran?
yeah, they were super hardcore.
Okay, right on. I'm listening.
And you build ships, build science ships and colony ships, and try to explore the world. And there was this fungal race of creatures, like just below me, who were super huge dicks. And like, there's a diplomacy screen. You can like try to like say, hey, we should have peace, or we should try to trade. And
Are
they
you
would-
typing this in?
Well, so you can play multiplayer.
Okay.
Up to like, it's some ridiculous number, like 32 or something.
Oh, wow.
With like real people, and so then you
And
would
32 times the 4X's. I can't even do the math. but-
Incredible.
It's a lot of X. Say that 5 times fast. So you let's get Hanson. Stop getting
I
us
got
off
it.
track.
Oh, that's pretty good.
So you, in just like versus the computer though.
Yeah.
You're just like selecting a list of different things you can do. So I tried to trade with them, and they would never accept any of my trade.
What are you trying to send their way?
I built an embassy like on their home world.
and you're offering them smaller embassies?
Whose homeworld? The fungal people?
Yeah, the fungal people. So you can trade. There's resources you gather, obviously. So you can trade that.
So wait,
you can trade like technology that you researched.
When you're saying they're below you, it's like a planet next to yours?
There's no north in space.
Yeah,
Reeves.
on my map they were below me, but if you were maybe on the fungal world, you would see yourself as the highest north, I guess. They were Australian fungal people.
So it is a universe. It's like a galaxy.
It's a galaxy. So you have each solar system. You can look at each solar system on its own, and you can zoom in and look at each planet, which is pretty cool. Just zooming in and out of things. I spent the first 10 minutes just zooming in and out and making myself super dizzy.
The computer downstairs is alone with a scroll wheel. I think that's what really amazed us.
Or I kind of had this Mass Effect moment when I was playing the game where I just kept zooming out and I hit the galaxy map and just zoomed out and saw this like cluster of stars, and then I kept going and I was like, oh, there's a whole galaxy of stars here, which is kind of fun.
Jeff's gonna die. What are you doing?
I just didn't know where that was going.
Did I say Dovin again?
No, you didn't. You're doing good. You're doing fine.
Okay,
Wait,
great.
so
Just
you're
ignore me.
trading with these dickheads. These
Yeah.
No, he's
well,
not.
No, I'm
That's the
trying
point.
to, but they won't take anything. And then I'm like, well, can I at least, because there was an objective I had to go research this anomaly that was on the other side of their space that they had taken up.
Okay.
I was like, can I at least have like you can negotiate to like at least pass through their space without getting into a war.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one of the
Now-
negotiation options. But they wouldn't let me do that either, no matter what I gave them.
So they were mean. They weren't phallic shaped. They're just straight up dicks.
You know what? They kind of were actually phallic shaped.
Huh.
They were
Little both.
mean
They were
mushroom capped people.
They were little gray dicks. And
So what happened?
Eventually I had to go to war with them. And I smashed these dicks into the ground.
God,
what I
we
did.
can't air this. Come on, guys.
So what does the combat look like then?
The combat's not super exciting. You build up your ship fleet, right? And you can have multiple fleets, and you can hire admirals to like station on different fleets. But it really just comes down to
Jeff, stop.
No, come on. That was Reiner.
what is happening over here?
I think people think of the word rear admiral when you say
Oh,
admiral.
rear-
So
yeah,
It becomes
so-
silly.
Rear admirals. That's great, guys. So I took my rear admiral and shoved it up there. It basically just boils down to who has bigger spaceships. What is happening? You guys are gone. And then you just like, it's like Civ where the numbers just fight.
And
Does
it's
that make sense?
all about phalluses.
It looks really good.
Okay. Is it a fun game? Fun guys.
It is a lot of fun, actually. It's super addicting. I was surprised about how quickly I got into it when a lot of it's managing systems. So you can colonize. You know what? He's taking his pants down.
We can't sit on opposite sides anymore. Hanson.
You guys are losing it.
I don't know if you understand. It's the peak of comedy because you made a couple of loose references to a penis.
That's right. I win. Okay. All right. So
No, it's going on. It's a fun game.
yeah, it's a fun game, fun game. You colonize new homeworlds. You can build new ships, and then you basically can re-territorize homeworlds.
Okay, just keep going ahead.
You're gonna have to cut his mic
Ugh.
and the camera.
I'm fine.
And then build new power stations, and it's fairly complex in terms of like what you have to like build up on your homeworlds.
Is the UI a disaster? Because when you say stuff like, oh, you can ask if you can have a passage through to go to that area over there, I just imagine that taking place in like within 8 subsystems and menus and just a disaster of UI.
No, there's always a couple of different ways to do things actually, and there's a pretty quick hit bar on the side that always like lets you quickly warp to a homeworld or quickly warp to your set of ships or whatever. Or if you want to like use a science ship to scan this station, all you have to do is select the ship and right click on the station.
So just let's get to it. I mean, do you think this is like a Civ competitor? Is it on that level of like a Civ 5?
I wouldn't say it's quite as polished as something like Civ.
Mm-hmm.
Civ is very refined at this point, and there's like 5 different ways to win, and every different faction functions a little bit differently, which is nice. This one has elements of all of that, but it feels like the further in I get, I'm sort of being forced into just fighting with everybody, if that makes sense. There's not as many ways to win. You kind of like take over 60% of the galaxy either through domination or sort of this like cultural victory. So
Okay.
their equivalent of a
Diplomacy's
cultural
not
victory.
working.
But my diplomacy, like I've tried diplomacy with 3 different guys, 3 different races, and even the one race that's not a huge dick is still
Hey, grow up, Reeves.
still kind of a butthead.
What are you
Unbelievable.
doing here?
So like I haven't had
Go on.
I have not had a lot of luck with the diplomacy.
Yeah. Well,
Two questions for
Oh,
you.
please.
Very quick. How long? This sounds daunting. How long is like a campaign?
Oh my. Well, so not campaign in a traditional sense either.
But you know
It's-
what I mean. Like
yeah,
from
yeah. You
start
can play.
to end game.
Well, you can start on a small map, and they have medium maps and large maps, and it's all randomly generated on where you start and all that. And so the replay value is super high. I played one game that took me like 16 hours.
Okay.
on
What size
on
map
a
was that?
medium map.
Medium. Okay.
So you can go even bigger. You can change the density of how like dense it is with alien races too. So you might encounter them less.
I like that. I like
Which
the
would
idea
actually
of
be
like
kinda
being
nice.
expanding for a while before it's like, oh, what is this weird thing? Instead of just being a cluster F.
Yeah, I would say it was the first like hour I was expanding on my own, and I didn't encounter anybody.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then the 32 player thing, it's all in real time then? You don't have to pause at any point? There isn't like an end turn because some 4X games.
Yeah, well, and actually the single player is like that as well. So you there are no turns. It's all in real time, but you can slow
cool.
when you're playing by yourself. You can slow down the speed,
And you
it'll-
can't do that in multi then.
No, it'll auto pause in single player sometimes when big events happen. Because when you're exploring the galaxy, you run across like here's this ancient like artifact from a precursor race, and you can study it. And so that's actually kind of fun to find that stuff. Or I found an abandoned space station. Nobody was there, but I was able to like turn it back on and manufacture a few like state of the art ships, like destroyer ships before it broke down. So that was kind of cool because I got a few like ships early on that were super powerful.
So if you like sci-fi, you like 4X, would you recommend this over Beyond Earth, that Civ game that came out a couple years ago?
Good question. Kind of, just because it's a little bit different. Like this scratches the itch that I kind of wanted from Beyond Earth, because Beyond Earth is really just you colonizing an alien world.
Right, but there's not like the interstellar stuff.
Right, where this is totally interstellar. There's a little bit of you colonizing worlds, but it's mostly you expanding across the universe
And finding out that love.
alien dicks. Yeah.
Oh, go a different route. Same conclusion. Cool. Do you have a review up yet or anything like that?
I do not yet. I'm hoping to have it up by the time podcast goes live.
Okay.
So we'll see if I make that or not.
Oh man, edge of my seat.
Yeah,
Great.
Could it be? So I haven't settled on a score yet. If
Okay.
that's your question, but I'm thinking it's going to be in the 8s.
Okay, in the 8s. Good to hear. Hey, Jeff Marchiafava. The reason we dragged you down here and that you've dove onto this podcast
Yes.
is to talk about the game that came out this week, Homefront: The Revolution.
Yeah. And I think it's also part of the reason that we're so punch drunk down here, at least
Oh,
Reiner
really?
and I, 'cause it's just
It's so good.
Oh boy.
You've been playing a lot of it, and then Reiner, you played a little bit of co-op today.
Yeah, I played the first hour on the test chamber on PC, which runs better than it does on PS4.
Yeah.
And then I joined him for co-op for about an hour, 2 hours.
yeah.
And here's what's delightful to me is I am endlessly tickled by the idea that Reiner, you've had this. How long have you been a Game Informer now?
21 years? 20,
Okay.
20
Wow.
Either 20 or 21 years.
And
Your
it's not
career could drink.
Yeah, almost.
Good.
and it's not just heavy metal and blood that gets you excited. Like you get endlessly excited about
anything.
janky, broken games.
Yeah,
and so
anything.
you sitting back in the bullpen by my desk today playing co-op, you're losing your mind. Like, look at that! That's so stupid! Look at it! Look at it! So what's happening in this game that's making you react?
I mean,
like
there's
that?
times where it's like we all die together, and then Fava comes in, and like we're all spawning back in, and Fava's like, I'm a boot again.
Yeah,
And then you look
'cause
over
I'm
the
boot.
screen, and he is just this
Flashing
broken boot.
Like the camera's broken somewhere. Yes.
Yeah, and it's just a boot on
It's like
screen.
my
What
boot.
are you talking about?
It's my character's boot that
are you,
kind of like
Canadian?
flashes in and out, and I all I can do is rotate around the boot.
What are you talking about?
And that's at the beginning of matches.
Yeah.
So I'm just screwed until they get
To a
if
checkpoint.
they get to an objective checkpoint, then I'll actually spawn in. But
So the co-op is a series of janky glitches. You were talking about some rocket launcher stuff today. What is this?
yeah, Cork had the rocket launcher because you can only carry one weapon at a time, and every time he would shoot it on our screens, there were no animations or anything. It would just kind of go like this, but the rocket is still sitting in the front of the rocket
And you just see an
launcher.
explosion.
Yeah.
So we're like, he got the rocket launcher, which we got from a pack of cards that you got.
Yeah,
You
it's-
buy a weapon box or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah,
And it's
blind
random
weapon
what's
box,
inside.
Yeah.
Sure.
And he got a rocket launcher. So we were super excited because there's these trucks in the game that are pretty hard to take down. So he comes in and we're like following Cork into the level and he's like, all right, guys, moment of truth. Here we go. And he shoots the rocket. We're just like,
Yeah, we're like,
did
what?
you shoot it? And then the truck explodes. We're like, what?
Yeah. I mean, it has just been a litany of weird bugs and performance problems.
So it sounds like the developers are really inspired by Goat Simulator. Is that what it is? Really goofy,
You know that hip
fun
trend on
shooter.
Steam, man.
Like,
I mean, it's
yeah, just about.
We should take a step back, though. So Homefront, this is the sequel to that THQ game from 2010, 2011.
which was pretty good.
Yeah, the opening level in particular, people always cite as like, oh, it's really interesting world design. And so this is an open world shooter take on that.
Yeah.
Coming
And-
from Deep Silver now. It's traded off hands 1,000 times.
Yeah, the original developer was Chaos,
right.
who was great. And then
This is Dam Busters.
who used to be guys from Free Radical,
But
that
then-
were kind of saved from the closure of Crytek.
Yeah, because they went over to Crytek for a while. Okay, so it's been passed through so many giant hands.
Yep.
And now it finally gets to store shelves. And it's an open world shooter where North Korea has taken over and you're trying to
The story is so dumb
It's
What is
super
what is
absurd.
it?
So in the near future, for some reason, Korea becomes this technological powerhouse, as you may expect.
by
happening right
creating a tablet that everyone needs.
Yes, because
What?
And they show this North Korean dictator on stage holding this tablet that's like going to take over the world.
and it literally does, because from that point on, the American military, in what may be kind of a bad decision, they decide to buy all of their military weapons from North Korea. But
This is the exact plot of Terminator Genesis, but okay, go
yeah,
on.
but there's a problem because North Korea has put a back door into all of the weapons.
Into everything.
So one day they just turn it all off, and then we're vulnerable. Yeah,
So this Korean tablet manufacturer starts making weapons
Yeah.
as well?
yeah, they make it. They make everything.
It's like if Apple just started to
yeah, I
make
think
machine
they
guns.
the
and
manufacturer's
and
called
if they were
Apex.
also North Korea though, so
Okay, so they turn on all this
the
stuff and then
story's
the
not
world
great, yeah.
explodes.
Yes.
Is it canonical with the first Homefront?
no, I think this is a reboot because people were kind of happy with the story in,
Yeah, it
in the
was
first
cool.
one,
Yeah.
you know. But what I will say is, like, I was really interested because of the open world format. That was something that turned me off of the first one. That it was, you know, more traditional levels, which we already get from so many military shooters. They wanted to do it as an open level, and you know the city of Philadelphia is occupied, so you have to kind of like hit your targets and run away, and that's kind of like
sounds
the
cool.
conceit. Yeah, and for the most part, that kind of works. In like they put more effort into, you know, when enemies can spot you and what happens when they spot you, in terms of, you know, calling in more characters, and then they'll have like these giant airships that will have, you know, like a huge you know, like spotlight that's looking for you, and so you actually do have to run away. You have to figure out, you know, where you can find cover, and a lot of the buildings are open and stuff, so you can really, you know, if you're just running away, they'll still see you, but when you duck through a couple buildings, you know, they'll lose you, and you can kind of set up somewhere else.
I want this game.
The problems
sounds really good.
The problems start
can have
in
it.
that. Yeah, we have several copies that I'm sure no one's married to, but the problems start with, I think, just the core gunplay mechanics, which are just too sluggish and too. I can't remember if it was last week or the week before we were talking about Overwatch. Not to compare these two games.
Oh,
like they're the
don't
same
get that
thing.
ball rolling,
But,
yeah.
but we had talked about how it was remarkable how well it handles on a controller, because there are just some certain conceits that developers have to figure out to make it still feel, you know, as good as if you're playing with a mouse and keyboard. And, you know, Blizzard is by no means the only people who have figured this out. I
Free
think.
Radical did back with Time Splitters 1.
Sure.
Sure.
As a possibility, but you know, like Call of Duty, Battlefield, Far Cry, I think all of these feel good. Some people complain about Far Cry, but I've always thought that it's totally
That's fine.
Yeah,
fine.
Fine. Don't tell Dan Tack that. but-
This is not fine, and it's just the I mean what I ended up coming to again and again in my mind is it feels like the shooting mechanics in Far Cry 3, or not Far Cry 3, Fallout 3, but without the VATS to salvage it. Like it's that level of like, I have this arsenal, this should be more fun, but it's just the actual ability to aim and, you know, how fast you're moving. Even if you know, I messed with all the sensitivity settings, whatever you can do, it's just not accurate enough. And it's not, I mean, it says it has aim assist, but it's just, it does not translate well to the controller to begin with.
How much of that comes down to maybe frame rate issues? People always say like, "Oh, 60 frames per second makes it control so much better." And this game chugs from what I've seen.
I started.
like my uncle.
I started with Ben's uncle chugs.
My uncle who's got a drinking problem.
Unbelievable! Why would you go there?
Why are you getting us off
Not
track again?
Not the right time. I started with the mechanics because I think there are serious problems just with the fundamental mechanics, but yes, then you layer on the frame rate problem because there are places where the frame rate isn't as bad and it still doesn't control well, but the normal level of frame rate in single player, it just, I mean, at times it's atrocious. And
it's like Uncle Reeves.
I have had, yes, exactly. The things that it does, we just don't want to remember.
I don't want to remember.
I mean, I've gotten a headache from playing this game the past 2 days because it's that bad at times that it's just like your eyes are going to start bleeding because you just can't look at it. And I mean, this
I think that's stigmata.
This is on top of a ton of other performance issues with, you know, characters popping in out of nowhere.
Yeah, that's the most unforgivable thing in co-op. Is
the texture loading.
Right in front of me, there's enemies spawning. Like right in front of me, like 2 feet away. It's like, boop,
PS1 thing.
Worst haunted house ever.
Sometimes they'll disappear too. So, you know, it works both ways. But I mean, like, texture loading in is all over the place. And then just bugs after bugs just all over. And the other, like, you go into a locker, they try really hard to make everything kind of seamless as you're going through these zones, even though the zones, it's not one giant open world. There are kind of zones that you go into, but they're large zones until you move on to the next one. But every time you go to a locker and leave the locker, or you get these job posting missions, or even when you complete an objective, sometimes the game will just freeze for a couple seconds and the sound is still going, but you lose complete control and everything on the screen is frozen, and then it will jump back in, and you know you're off aiming somewhere else because you've become completely disoriented.
Yeah. I'll say that's PS4. We didn't experience that on PC.
That's
so
good.
if you're watching this on YouTube, the footage you see next to us, it's from the PC version.
We waited for the PS4 copy because that was the one that we had the most questions about going into it, and we figure that's the one our readers are probably going to care most about, the console ones.
Yeah.
And they were also it kept on getting delayed when we were going to get that code, so that
we wanted to look at all of
raised
them.
more questions. So I mean, by no means, you know, I haven't written the review yet or anything, and we are going to check out the PC version to see, you know, where those differences end up stacking up. But we also felt that it was good. You know, even though our review is going to be delayed, we want to come out and say that, like, if you're thinking about buying this on console, like, do not do it.
Is the design sense on the right page, though? On the right track? Like, I mean, would it be cool if they had another 6 months to iron out these things, and maybe even it can be cool someday on a Steam sale when it's updated and patched?
Possibly, but you also get into a lot of AI problems as well. And I mean, like these
guys that can't go upstairs.
Yeah, these aren't just bugs. I mean, the last part I was playing, there was a character on my, you know, like an NPC character on my side, and we were getting ambushed, and he spent the entire battle standing right out in the middle, facing the wrong way and not shooting at all, and just constantly getting shot from everywhere. So he's just like dancing out there, getting shot, and like.
He was distracting the enemy for you.
That he actually was, because I was just sitting, you know, on the periphery, just like taking pot shots at these guys. But like, I mean, that is an extreme case of the, you know, AI problems, but there are AI problems across the board with it.
I just don't think it feels good, Hanson. That's the big thing. Like, just the core gameplay just doesn't have a good feel
And-
to
and
it.
the
And
part,
that's
you know,
everything in a shooter, right?
And the parkour mechanics too, we should talk about that. Like,
Oh,
there's
is new.
there's all the verticality in these levels, which is great that you can go out and explore these. But just like the act of jumping and grabbing onto a ledge, and when he's going to decide to do it. I mean, there are times where Shay was laughing at me because I was at this wall and I was jumping repeatedly trying to get it up, and you think I'm insane, but sometimes you'll jump 3 or 4 times and he won't do it, and then on the 5th time he will grab onto whatever recognition is going on. It's like, oh hey, I can actually climb this, and he'll climb up it. And it's there's always just kind of a stutter, if you're running, and a lot of games do it where you run and you kind of jump, you mantle over something.
Okay.
There's always a stutter there. There's always a stutter when you're trying to climb up something.
What does this game
rough,
teach?
rough.
Yeah, what does it teach you or make you think about in terms of Deep Silver as a publisher? If they were that desperate to get it out without giving it the love and maybe a little bit more polish that it needed, are they not doing great? I have no idea what's going on.
I
with
mean,
them.
at some point you kind of cut your losses on a game, right? Like,
Yeah, but it
this
certainly
is
sounds like it's one of those,
playable
like-
to a degree.
Yeah.
I think the original had like a somewhat fan base where like they could have
I like
continued
that
to
game,
nurture
yeah.
that and like
Yeah.
made the not Homeworld. What is this
Homefront?
game called?
Homefront.
Oh, Homefront.
Stellaris.
Yeah, they could have made Homefront Stellaris actually turn into like a decent like franchise.
Well, they were trying for so long. I mean, it was not quite in the development hell that Doom was in, but I mean, it's been putzing around out there for a long time, and it seems like I know there's core issues, but it seems like just a couple more months of polished, and they probably could have gotten rid of a lot of this. But
I love the idea, like you said, the open world, your back's against the wall, this country's invading yours. I mean, it has like that City 17 kind of Metro 2033 vibe to it, where humanity, your faction is really, really in rough shape. I like that, and you just feel like a cog in this big machine too. You don't feel like that Rambo character,
right.
No, honestly, like some of those bugs sound pretty funny. You might have sold some people on actually checking it out, so maybe this game will sell pretty well.
On that front, I am tempted to play this, I swear to God, because of an Easter egg. Apparently, there's an arcade machine, and you can activate and play through several levels from Time Splitters 2, which is my favorite Time Splitters game.
And where
it's
else are you going to get that?
But it's like an HD version of these Time Splitters levels. Like, it's like a complete recreation. It's not like a cheap mod of this game. Like, it looks spot on. Sound effects, music, everything. It's crazy.
Maybe
Right?
that's where all the development time went.
Do you think wait, so does that mean Deep Silver owns Time Splitters license?
I guess they must.
Huh.
But I've seen reports saying that it didn't carry over because Crytek owned it, and then Deep Silver bought a lot of stuff from Crytek. And there were reports that they didn't buy Time Splitters along with it, but somehow, maybe
they
this
just
is.
don't
I can't
care.
imagine that
Yeah.
snuck in.
I don't know.
It's really. If you're a Time Splitters fan, look up footage from this because it's like
That's cool.
It's the snow level. It's crazy.
Could this be them teasing like, oh, we're making? Wouldn't that be good? That's what you want, right?
Well,
Is like an HD
course.
version of
Well, it'd be fun to see a new Time Splitters and just be as wacky as possible. I think it'd
right.
be great.
But even if they released an HD version of the first one, or first like 2 or 3,
yeah, first 3.
Like, that'd
yeah,
be
they
amazing.
totally should. Yeah, first one. I mean, I love the first one a lot. There's not too much to go back to. Once Time Splitters 2 came out, it's just a better game in every way. But cool. So Homefront Revolution, check it out.
Yeah,
Come one, come all.
Time to split from that game.
Another Revolution that I just played through last night. We can talk about it briefly, but it came out on Steam on Tuesday, and it's called 1979 Revolution Black Friday, which is a tough name to remember.
that is a rough name.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to check it out, Reeves? I was screaming at you about it.
I did look into it. Like I watched a video. I didn't have enough time to I started downloading it, but I didn't have enough time to actually play it.
That's fine.
It looks like a Telltale game.
It is very much a Telltale game, but it's not made by Telltale, but in that Walking Dead vein. But what separates it from the rest is that it is based on, it's a documentary game, if you want to call it, but
That's
it's
awesome.
based on the Iranian Revolution in 1979. So characters that are real people, they integrate photos, they integrate video, and it's just one of those experiences, like you can beat it in 2.5 hours comfortably, something like that. The ending is absurdly abrupt. One of the
Really?
most bizarre endings I've had in a while, where it was building and I'm like, this could be a home run. I love this. This could be a home run. And then basically cut to credits.
Oh,
Feels
weird.
like mid-sentence.
And it's not like
So what is-
part 1 of 2. Or
I mean, it's
3
called,
or
I mean,
something.
so it's called 1979, the Revolution Black Friday. And so maybe they're going to follow up with like the rest of the events of the Revolution. Because that's just one day.
But it doesn't feel like a to be continued.
It could be, They certainly.
That sounds weird.
It seems like they left wiggle room for either way, where they
I hope
could
they
argue.
don't. I hope they go on to something else. In the same vein of being this kind of documentary game. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
Well,
But
that's what intrigued me about it is like you mentioned the real photos, because there's a mode or a sequence in the game where you're taking photos of this crowd and then it cuts to like an actual photo of that crowd. You're like, oh, that actually does kind of line up a little bit with the video game graphics.
Yeah.
And then they give you some history on what was happening in Iran at the time?
yeah.
And so I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool, because I don't know a whole lot
Yeah, I
about
like
what was
that.
happening
but
back
it's
then.
not just a series of like reading Wikipedia entries. Like it does a really good job, I think, of like rolling out specific information, and they kind of do the thing, the classic of having entire groups represented by certain people, where it's like, there's going to be this power vacuum when the revolution comes, and so all these different, like the religious angle, the communists, everybody's kind of vying for power, and you get to see all these different people and try and figure out like, who's on the right path here. There's a couple key decisions along the way, but I really, really think it's one of the most interesting releases of the year. I absolutely loved it. It started out and I was like, this is more polished than I expected, just from this indie game being released on Steam. It's still a little bit cheap around some edges, and it's so stuck in that Telltale mold where, they need the action QTE sequences where you're running and jumping over barrels and stuff like that. That feels a little bit awkward.
Weird and like
yeah.
a historical thing.
I mean, when I think of Telltale, I think of choice.
Yeah.
How do they do that if they're trying to be kind of a documentary then?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, that is the big struggle with documentary games, is how do you give player agency if you're saying this happened like this? They do it in a couple ways where it's kind of like minor characters. They'll have you choose very important things with them. And then with large characters who are based on historical figures, according to the photos and stuff in the game, unless that's all a lie. I don't think it is, though. But these important characters, from the big choice, it seems like, in the game, it's not a matter of, well, I don't want to spoil anything, but it basically is like, whose side are you on more than this person's going to die or this person's going to die. And so it's just kind of like subtle allegiance issues at play, but it is a brutal game. There is still matters of life and death throughout the game quite a bit. But it's from a small studio in New York, and I think they got part of their funding from Sundance, which is a weird route. But the founder of the studio was the cinematic director at Rockstar.
Oh, wow.
And he worked on like GTA 3 and San Andreas and Vice City, Warriors, a bunch of, I think Bully as well. So a high pedigree from the founder of the studio, or at least a guy who's high up at the studio. But it's amazing to me to play through it and to get connected to these characters, because it works so well for me. I kept thinking about, it's probably the wrong comparison, but I kept thinking about like Telltale's Game of Thrones game, where they try so hard to connect to those characters. And Reiner, I know you liked it more than I did, I think.
Parts of it, yeah.
Parts of it, yeah. But it's still like, a lot of those characters I just don't care about. But with characters in 1979 Revolution, it's like, here's a character. Hey, by the way, here you can walk into this bedroom and play some home movies. And you can see this character on their first day at school, or this character at the beach with their family, or like cooking. And it's like, it made me emotional watching.
Wow.
Like,
it's
wow,
crazy that
now
they
I'm
got
super
that
on board.
that footage of all
Yeah.
those people.
Yeah, and it's weird to say the most effective part of this game was those home movies, but I've never seen home movies from the early 60s from inside Iran. Like, it's awesome to experience.
Is like the developer related to the people in the...
I don't think he's
game,
related.
or-
He's Iranian. It seems like a lot of people on the development team are Iranian.
He must have got permission then, I assume, from these actual people?
Yeah, in the credits, they thank a lot of people for the photographs and stuff like that along the way. There's also a weird moment, right? It's early on in the game where you're in this crowd and you can like take a picture of this guy, and it explains like, oh, this guy was called The Walking Dead, where apparently like it was a thing during this revolution. I don't know if it goes beyond that, but people would just line themselves in like photographs of people who were murdered by the Shah. And so it's just weird to have like a bullet point to be like, hey, The Walking Dead, everybody, that game that we super modeled this entire game on.
Oh, weird.
But it's really, if you have any interest in history and Telltale game design, I really strongly recommend it.
Yeah, I was...
Two weird things to combine there, I gotta say.
Right.
I was watching Lincoln at home, Spielberg's Lincoln, the other day, and I was just thinking, I was like, man, the game industry still needs to figure out how to do documentary stuff like this. You know, like telling
Yeah.
these stories without just it being Normandy Beach or D-Day that has to have action, but being able to tell stories of these characters.
Yeah.
That's cool to see that this exists and hopefully becomes a mold for other developers to maybe look at and model.
It is the most exciting thing in the video game industry for me. I think it's like the biggest untapped genre. And, on the company's website, they even talk about like, oh, the first documentary game. I think that's a stretch. I think it's a super, super, super wildly underdeveloped genre for the video game industry. But to call this the first, I think it's a little bit of a stretch. Like Valiant Hearts, I think, did a good push for it a couple years ago with World War One. Yes. Lemmings, naturally. No, but really, I mean, it's like subtly, I think there have been great documentary games in the past. I would consider Oregon Trail a documentary game. Like they base the statistics of like what goes wrong with you on that trip based on actual journals and breaking all that stuff down.
And there's some stuff that's available now on VR, like the landing on the moon. You get to be a part of that mission.
Absolutely.
And that's totally a documentary of taking you through all those steps. You hear the president talking to the nation. You're getting all this history in it. So I like that too. But you're not really playing a game, though. That's the thing. You're just it's an interactive experience.
Well, this is the problem, is how you make some interesting gameplay to associate or like accompany that. And this game definitely struggles. It's a little bit of grab bag of mechanics. Like, just click here, just interact with this, have fun, take a picture here with like a swing meter based on when you can take the picture. And so it is a problem that people are still trying to work on. But I would argue, I don't think people talk about this enough, the greatest documentary game of all time. Do you have any guesses, Jeffem?
You already said Oregon Trail.
Yeah.
Portal?
Beatles Rock Band. Beatles Rock Band by a mile.
Yeah, sure.
It's amazing. It's unlocking the photos and videos along the way, but just giving you a sense of the real evolution of this real band. I don't think anything comes close to that.
Well, you could say some of those
the war games, right? Like retelling those battles.
Yeah,
I was going to say some of the. I'm not going to say this is better than Beatles Rock Band, but like some of those Assassin's Creed games incorporated, especially 2. I really actually dug. Like you walk across this like cathedral, and then you go and read the actual historical details of the cathedral, and I really enjoyed that before it got so extreme where you're like riding on Paul Revere's horse, but like I think they took it too far. But like, there's elements of like that can happen well in a video game.
Absolutely.
Those games got me excited about the history that they were showing, right? Like, and I wanted to know more about that, even though I knew they're taking liberties here and there.
And to make you feel those events, and it's like I never thought I would see inside or feel what it was like to be on the ground during the Iranian Revolution, 1979. Like I knew a little bit about it, but not much. But it's like, oh, here. I now have a rough idea of the emotions involved with that. So I hope 1979 Revolution is a step
forward in games.
That's right. Guaranteed revolution in games.
That's right.
No, I can only hope.
Guaranteed Black Sabbath. What?
All right, you guys want to move on to emails?
Please.
All right. And welcome back to the Game Informer Show. We lost an Andrew Reiner along the way. It was really effed up. Like this pentagram formed on the floor and then sucked him down to the bowels of hell, and he screamed, "This is where I want to be."
That's why I'm not playing that game.
All right. This is emails. People write into podcast@gameinformer.com. And then at the end of this, we're going to choose email of the week and send them out something nice. So if you have some thoughts, some news you want us to cover, some questions, anything like that, feel free to email podcast@gameinformer.com. Also, questions or comments or thoughts about the first 10 chapters of Uncharted 4, because our game club kicks off next week.
Next week?
I'm excited to finally play this thing.
I got to finish.
You haven't even
The
started
first
yet?
I have not even started it yet.
Oh,
You're screwed,
clock's
dude.
counting down.
What about you? Are you going to be at chapter 10, or what are you doing?
I'm almost there already. I'm
And
at
are you going to
chapter
stop
9.
it right there?
I think so.
God bless you. I want as many
I'm
people as possible to do
Excited.
that.
Wait, how far are you?
I'm on chapter 9, I think. 8, maybe 8.
Are you going to stop at 10?
Yeah, I'll stop.
God, you guys are
Okay.
the best. I
But
love
are
you
we
guys.
supposed to play through 10?
play through 10?
Okay.
Although it seems like we might have messed it up. But we'll talk about it all next week.
All right.
All right, starting it off, we have Riley Bethel from Sydney, Australia, writing in and says, "Hey, GI crew, I've been looking forward to going in on DayZ on my PS4 for a while now. I don't have a PC. I haven't seen any news about it for ages. I can't find it on PlayStation's website anymore either. Have you heard anything? Do you find that developers make announcements and then things never happen?" Absolutely. It seems like this game on PS4 has just fallen completely off the radar, and it's insane to me.
I guess I wasn't on my radar to begin with.
They announced it coming out for PS4. The final version on PC isn't even out. But this is a real pet peeve of mine: is when developers and publishers and console manufacturers at E3 specifically can announce these things are happening, they just never happen. It's like, shouldn't you be held accountable for that? That's super.
Well, I think there's this concept of like you want to get people excited about your game, like early on, and like start to build that like following of people who sort of like are eagerly anticipating the release. And I think sometimes people jump the gun and announce things too soon.
Yeah, but that's different than like ports. I mean, not saying that it's like a piece of cake, but there's something different between announcing your game too soon and announcing this game's coming to our platform. Everybody, buy one of these dumb things, and then no one does it.
I think it's kind of the same concept though. Like you're trying to get people excited. Like, no, you can play that on PS4 as well. So don't buy an Xbox. That kind of thing.
Yeah. And
then obviously sometimes it takes longer to port things than you think it's going to.
The classic example I always think of, and I think a lot of people do, was at E3 2011 when Ken Levine went out there and was like, hey, BioShock Vita, everybody. It's going to be a whole new BioShock experience. Buy a Vita today.
Sure.
Nothing. Not a peep.
Well, and then you don't want to, I'm not saying this is right or anything, but you don't want to come back like a year later and be like, hey, you know that thing you're excited about? Yeah, we're not going to do that.
We refuse.
Yeah, so you just quietly
hope you forget.
ignore it and hope people forget about it.
But don't forget, keep writing in emails about these games that have slipped through the cracks.
Tell us about all the games that you want that aren't out.
Like Samurai Gun coming to the PS4, which they announced a long time ago, and it's one of my favorite local multiplayer games. And they announced it, and then just not a peep. Just you can't do that.
Come on, give us a peep.
Unbelievable.
Gore Verbinski's Kinect game. Do you remember this?
No.
The director, Gore Verbinski from Pirates of the Caribbean fame, at E3 2012, he announced a big Kinect game. Like, hey, Hollywood talent coming to the Kinect. Everyone buy a Kinect. Here we go.
I remember, this is a super deep cut, but like maybe 10, more than 10, probably like 20 years ago, they announced Two Human, the game that it had.
Oh, yeah.
No. But this was like before they even announced it. There was an announcement they made when they made the announcement beside Mass Effect. And everyone's like, these two games are very similar. But like 5 years before that even, they had announced Two Human.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, this sounds like the coolest thing ever. They're like, it's going to be 90 hours long, and it's going to be like sci-fi and all this stuff. And there was like one screenshot in EGM. And I thought it sounded so cool. And nothing. And then 5 years go by, and then they re-announce it next to Mass Effect. And I'm like, oh, this game's back. I'm like, this could be really cool. And then it turned out to not be cool. So I wish they'd never re-announced it.
I forgot that they re-announced it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Hey, how about The Agent?
Right, exactly.
We ever going to get that?
Yeah, Rockstar's game for Sony. Yeah,
so bad.
There's always rumblings.
Or what was the one that took place in the Orient? Something
Horror of the Orient.
Yeah.
From Team
LA
Bondi.
Noir guys, yeah.
Yeah, or Neo, I think, is a Two Human example where they announced it for the PS3 early on from Team Ninja, and now it's finally coming out on PS4. That just took a hell of a long time.
Or The Last Guardian. Never
That's
gonna
right.
see
Where's
it.
that dumb thing?
Never gonna.
Sorry, I've called it dumb. I love Last Guardian. All right, Jake Z writes in, he says, I get a sense of awe when seeing a beautiful vista in a game, but never really in movies. Avatar might be an exception. Do you guys have similar experiences or thoughts? Thanks, love the show. I thought that was an interesting idea, because especially with like, I think it's very connected to Uncharted 4, because so many people are tweeting out screenshots of that thing, like, look at this vista, holy Lord. And you do have those breathtaking moments in games, whereas just seeing like an environment in a movie, has it ever been awe-inspiring for you guys? Or as awe-inspiring as games?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good example. I guess Uncharted 4 has some good ones, but I'm trying to think of a better example or something more.
I
not
think
quite as
almost
recent.
like Planet Earth. You know, like,
that's a great
like
one.
those are the times when you think like, holy crap.
The DVD
Yeah.
this
show.
isn't- Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was thinking games though.
What were you saying? Why don't movies have that
Have
same
that
effect
same
that
kind of
games?
effect, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like seeing the Citadel for the first time and Mass Effect's another big one in the games world, but in the film world, it's tough. It's like there's those technical moments where I think like, oh, this is a trendsetter. Something new is happening here. Like I remember like Planet of the Apes, like they get a crazy close up on Caesar's face, and just seeing that amount of details, like, well, that's a revolution in movies. There we go. It's a new standard.
I don't know. Inception, maybe. There was some scenes
Yeah.
in that with the
That's a good one.
dreamscape and stuff.
Real good one. Scott Pilgrim, I think for different reasons, is still awe-inspiring to me, just for the fun and how abstract it can be at times. But good question, Jake Z. Let's see. We got Connor. He writes in. He says, hey, nerds. I was browsing your website when I saw that Hitman Go was coming to the Samsung Gear VR. Do you guys have any impressions on that? I read your write-up on the Oculus Rift and HTC Vive in the most recent issue, but I haven't heard any fuss, besides Lil Wayne having a fun day with Wesley Snipes.
What?
What was that second half?
I don't know. He's just calling us
Into a
nerds,
different
and
email.
it seems like asking about Hitman Go on VR. Yeah, sure, it seems like a thing. I don't think we've played it yet.
No. Wait.
Do people care?
this is the question. What's the state of VR?
What makes that a VR experience?
It's pretty.
Something you have to experience in VR. Just like look around.
People
Look
like
around,
looking at
see
little
your figure.
people.
Zoom in, I guess.
Yeah.
I could see that working. I mean, I liked Hitman Go okay. I think I liked Lara Croft Go a lot better.
Uh-huh.
So I'd take more of that, or maybe
Give me some more of that in
maybe
VR.
some
Now,
Legacy of Kain
augmented
VR.
reality might be cool.
For
If you-
Hitman Go.
Yeah, if you played that like on your table or whatever.
And to go assassinate
be a
Giant
little-
Reeves.
That would be a little more cool. I
Yeah,
guess.
I'd see that little figure running around, or a little Blink the Time Sweeper.
Yeah.
walking towards you.
And then he like walks up your shoulder.
Yeah, and then he
and then he
blinks out of
whispers,
existence.
Kill your family.
This week also saw the release of Portal Stories VR, which is the guys who made, or the team that made Portal Stories Mel, which was that fan mod, but the most impressive Portal fan mod out there. And Kyle Hilliard checked it out, and he said there's no portal gun in it, but outside of that, it's an interesting VR experience.
Outside of that,
Wait,
it's a
are
great
there
Portal
portals?
I don't think
Yes.
so.
Oh, wait, I thought
You
you
don't
said
have
there
portals?
Kyle, thumbs up, thumbs down. Were there portals in the booth? He says thumb sideways. He
side
doesn't know what he's
thumb?
talking about.
He's just banging his head against the
There was
window.
a single portal. There's a window.
I'm excited about a game that's coming out next week in theory, which really got high up there on Reddit a while ago, called, I think it's like King Spray Graffiti Simulator.
Yeah,
But this-
you won't stop talking about
I'm
that.
excited just because Tilt Brush is like, I think, the most interesting Vive experience. Maybe Job Simulator and Tilt
Yeah,
Brush.
but isn't that because you're painting in 3D and that's like something no one has ever been able to do before?
Yeah, but still, I've always liked to try graffiti, try my hand at graffiti, but I've never been bold enough to
We
try.
got a brick wall right there, dude.
You know what? That's a really good point. We should just graffiti the crap out of the Game Informer studio walls.
should.
That's not a good idea. But, so there are some VR things to look forward to, but certainly enthusiasm's dying down, I'm sure, to the relief of many podcast listeners.
Well, so is there a larger question about VR in here?
Just about Hitman Go on
Just because,
VR.
like, it seems like VR's out, and then there's nothing to sort of follow up that like initial release, and people aren't.
and people can't get their hands on it. It's a mess. Bold future, everybody. All right, Jordan from Fairfax, Virginia writes in. He says, since Destiny the Taken King won Shooter of the Year last year, does that mean that the Witcher 3 Blood and Wine expansion could win RPG of the Year?
Well, Witcher 1 Game of the Year for a boss.
I know, but the
He's talking about
expansion coming out this
Does
year.
the expansion count?
Well,
Let's go.
as
Keep
an-
up, Reeves. Here we
as a
go,
new
baby.
game.
Right.
Yeah, we.
that's not in VR. We don't normally count expansions for Game
Yeah,
of the Year.
there have been a few exceptions, and when we make those exceptions, it's because we feel it has kind of transformed the experience into a game worthy of counting on its own, I think, is how we kind of approach that.
It's
So-
nebulous, but we usually in the write-up will
Yeah.
clarify exactly what we mean
Trying
by
to
it.
think
But
of the last time
And,
that
and it
didn't
also
happen.
happens when it like multiple editors have spent 100 hours playing it, and it's like this should be acknowledged that this is something that's still going on.
yeah,
so.
for sure. But I mean, even though Blood and Wine is like a 20-plus hour experience, according to CD Projekt Red, it's still, there's going to be some tough competition this year. I mean, Final Fantasy 15 is coming out.
Uncharted.
Not just on the JRPG front.
Oh.
The RPG front. I'm saying specifically with the JRPGs, though. We have 15. And then, I don't know if you guys saw that Persona 5 trailer
Yeah, it looks
from
good.
last week. I'm not a Persona guy. I mean, I'm not against it. I would love to try it. I've never tried one. But that trailer is awesome. Just the UI design, Fava.
Yeah.
You should watch that, man. It's
Their UI is
crazy.
really good.
It is some of the most impressive creative UI I've ever seen in the
Crazy
game.
to think their last game was Catherine, which
Right.
Kohler was still here. That was like 5 years ago or something.
Who?
Phil Cold Shoulder.
Curtis Knight writes in and says, why do you think there is a tendency for a lot of games journalists to conform to a hipster, politically correct archetype? It's frustrating, and I appreciate how you guys keep that stuff out of the podcast for the most part. Thank you. I thought this was an interesting question. It was much longer and much more bitter, but I boiled it down to that basic thing of the
Kyle
game-
just ran out.
Yeah,
He hated that question.
What are we gonna
so
do?
much.
Yeah,
Kyle was manning.
he
the
knows his
control room
numbers
booth.
up. So
Do
he's
you
outta here.
sense this, Jeff, in the industry?
I don't know that you can go with that specific of a stereotype. I mean, you have a bunch of 20-year-old probably middle class people who write about technology for a living. So they're probably going to be a little more hipster, a little more liberal.
I think also something you have to factor in is that a real hotbed for the games industry is San Francisco, one of the most progressive, politically correct cities in the world. And when all these other outlets are based out of there,
You don't
not
get
that-
more hipsters than that.
Yeah, there's a certain culture, a certain air. I'm not saying it's a group think, but I think there's a certain element that comes from that.
Why
Not
are you
that there's
saying
anything
their-
wrong with that.
Why are you saying their politics are more correct?
I'm not saying that.
dare you.
But I think that might explain why I mean, I would like to think
Yeah.
that we're politically correct outside of the conversation about dicks for 25 minutes early in this podcast.
I understand.
Yeah.
But we're from Minnesota, so things might be a little bit different.
We like dicks.
Sure.
Great stuff, Reeves.
Hey.
All right, let's see. We have Pat
Smith,
from
School of Humor.
Ireland saying, "Hi guys, huge fan of the podcast, and all things Game Informer. Unfortunately, my question involves me making an embarrassing admission. I haven't owned a Nintendo console since a Game Boy Color in the 90s, and I only own Donkey Kong Country and an Abe's Exodus port." You're really doing that wrong. Are there any seminal games or consoles that, for whatever reason, you never got around to? And if so, does the admission cause you any embarrassment? And again, it's Pat from Scared Kilmacow, Ireland. Yes, that's pronounced as ridiculously as it looks. Scared Kilmacow. Huh.
I like that.
That is good. Anything you're missing out on, Reeves? Let's just go consoles, because games would go on forever, maybe.
I have nothing that big. Like, I was late to the party with N64, which I think I mentioned before. I jumped on early with the Sega Genesis, so I was kind of late to the SNES. And then when I kept going Saturn, so I picked.
Always
kept
bet on
going
Saturn.
Sega, so I went Saturn instead of PlayStation. So that was a big mistake. So I eventually got a PlayStation and N64, but yeah, the N64 was years later.
Yeah, I played a lot of N64, but I didn't own one until I got into high school, and then I bought one used for like $20 from my friend Kayla. But yeah, it's like, I mean, the early console stuff, but I knew that I liked RPGs so much that I went back in high school then and played like the best of the best from Super Nintendo, and also, Mario World and Super Metroid. Didn't finish those necessarily, but there's a lot that I feel like I picked the cream of the crop that I was interested in from Super Nintendo. Jeffem, however.
Yeah. PS2, PS1.
Oh, you mean the two of the
really?
best consoles?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Everything Sega. I've never bought a Sega console.
What were you doing during
I
that?
stopped GameCube era. See, before I aspired to working in the industry, I did what a lot of kids who didn't have a lot of money did, which was you pick one console and that's the one that you play on. And so I went Super Nintendo to Nintendo 64,
Naturally.
and then I jumped to Xbox, and the generation after that, the 360, I got both of them, and that's when
You finally
became-
went PlayStation.
Yep.
So with PS3.
So with the
That's
backwards
crazy.
compatibility of PS3, did you play any of the early PlayStation stuff?
Not really, no.
But that's why you're not a Metal Gear guy. That's why you're not a Final Fantasy guy. I feel like there's a lot of those big, the series that had a big impact on the PlayStation.
They hold nothing over. I have no nostalgia for them.
No nostalgia.
So, yeah.
That's sad.
I mean, but I
Hollow
I
Man.
have played, the newer Metal Gear games. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm. It's not like I'm anti those games or anything.
Did you go
but it's
back and
just-
play the first Metal Gear Solid?
I had played a little in, I think maybe PC.
Oh,
and I played the one that came to 360.
Metal Gear Rising.
Yeah, the best one, right?
Best one.
The one that everyone loved. I thought it was fine.
Wait, what are you
I wasn't-
talking about? The one that came to 360?
The one with
yeah,
the
was it 2?
Raiden?
Yeah, the one with Ryan.
Oh, that came to the original Xbox with like skateboarding riding and stuff?
Well, was it the original Xbox?
Yeah.
Metal Gear, that one. Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
I was
That's
thinking it was
confusing.
Vengeance.
Everyone
for
else
some
was
reason.
upset, and I thought, yeah, this is fine. This is fun.
It can go both ways because there's sometimes systems, like I bet on Dreamcast early on. I was like, this Dreamcast really didn't take off, and I remember spending a lot of money.
You invested
Hunting
in it, I
around, yeah, I invested heavily in Sony stock or Sega stock.
believe. Oh boy, that's your
And-
first mistake.
But so sometimes you can buy a system and it doesn't pan out for you too.
That's true. Words of wisdom.
Hey, think about it.
My question is, I have a Nintendo 2DS. This is from Martin in Newcastle. I have a Nintendo 2DS, and I've never played a Zelda game, and I wondered if there was one Zelda game I should play on this platform. Which one should I go for?
Which platform did you say again?
2DS.
2DS.
I'm not listening to you.
I noticed. No, Nintendo 2DS.
A Link to the Past. Did it come out on 2DS?
trying
Can you
to
get it
think
on?
No,
which
you
ones
need
came out or
you
something.
need the new 3DS to play Link to the Past.
Oh my god!
you just get Link Between Worlds, man.
Not Spirit Tracks. That's not on 2DS, is it? I thought there was a 3DS game.
What are you talking about? 2DS plays all 3DS games?
Oh, that's right. Sorry, when he said that, I was thinking the original DS.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, the first one you referenced was not Spirit Tracks, but yeah, just go
Yeah,
Link Between Worlds.
Worlds,
I think
that's-
it holds up well, even if you're not nostalgic about Link to the Past.
One of the best 2D Zeldas around. Easily.
I mean, yeah,
if
definitely.
not the. If
All right,
not the.
there we go, Martin. Hope we helped you out. Hey, GI crew. Usually I wake up early on the weekends to play video games, and my go-to beverage is coffee. Is there a go-to drink or snack that you guys consume while playing video games? Also, how much coffee do you drink a day? And then he mentions he likes to keep his controller clean so he doesn't eat a lot of crap. What's your go-to snack or drink when playing video games?
Well,
This is from Josh Jones in Ohio.
Used to be
by the way.
Mountain Dew. I used to drink a ton of Mountain Dew.
Today I saw you ordered a Mountain Dew at a Chinese restaurant to go with your sesame chicken, and then you got a can of Mountain Dew for the
right.
road.
What
It's
is
the
wrong with you?
classic
And he
Chinese
says
dish
he doesn't drink a
drink.
lot nowadays.
Hey, what are you at 7? Mountain Dew.
That's the first time I had Mountain Dew all week.
How old are you?
I'm 20,
Come on, Reeves. How old are you?
36.
36-year-old
Yeah,
man
36-year-old
chugging
man.
Mountain Dew.
Well, it's like I said, first time all week. I'm proud of myself.
But Mountain
Normally-
Dew's your go-to pop?
well, yeah, I'm a go-to soda for sure. It's probably I don't drink a lot of soda though.
Okay.
Usually, I'm drinking like if I'm at home, I will drink a beer, or sometimes I'll make a Scotch drink, or maybe a old fashioned.
Unbelievable.
And then you mix it with some Mountain Dew?
That's right. That's my go-to
gentleman.
mixer. Yeah.
Do you have a go-to
do.
drink or anything when you're gaming?
No.
Nothing?
Not even water.
I mean, I'll drink water. I don't know that it's my go-to or anything.
The blood of your
Waters.
enemies.
Yes, the blood of my enemies.
It's tough to find a good snack. I'm
Yeah,
sympathizing
it's-
with Josh because you don't want to get the controller all grubby.
exactly.
Chips even, it's like salty and
I
greasy.
think honestly, most of the time I'm not drinking. when I'm
Right.
playing
What about
games.
snacks? Food snacks.
Usually, I'm not snacking either.
Okay.
It looks like you were trying to think of a joke there for a long
No, I was just
time.
laughing because Jeff
There was
was
the filter.
laughing. and
Oh,
it just
okay.
Maybe laugh.
I drink about 1 cup of coffee a week. To answer his other question,
I've started getting back into it, and I'm at 2.75 a day.
a day.
Yeah.
Doesn't it make you super sick?
Yeah, it does, but it's worth it because it tastes really good. And I know that if I go without it, I'm gonna die. But it's so good to fall back into that sin.
You're
It's
sick.
it's the fun addiction, as people call
Okay,
it.
good.
Sure.
Tyler Hall writes in, "Hi Hanson and friends." These guys, I don't think they consider me friends.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
It's typical formalities. Blah 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 blah. He says he likes this podcast. My question is simple: why don't you guys do Weekend Warrior anymore? It's pretty dumb, and we could and often do make our own version in the Overblood Facebook group. But I always look forward to it. Says Tyler Hall. What's with that?
Yeah,
Reeves?
Weekend Warrior's not dead. The Dirty Secret is our interns sort of handle that, spearhead that, and we took a month off having interns in the office because we're between terms. So
Yeah.
Weekend Warrior will be coming back very soon.
Because new batch of interns just started up today.
New batch of interns, we're training them in, and so look forward to hearing about. We'll probably announce either this Friday or next Monday.
Oh, cool. Yeah, but it's going to be a good crew. We have a video intern this time around.
I know, that's exciting.
So we'll talk more about that in the future and all that stuff. All right, everybody. What's your email of the week?
Which consoles you don't own? Because he embarrassed
Yeah,
himself.
that was good.
That is
I like
a
that
good one.
The coffee one was interesting.
Yeah, you got Fava to talk about how he doesn't mind water. Where is this dumb
Big
console
water
one?
fan.
I'm going to find this water one. Oh, here we go. This
console
We
one.
can't do that one because he's from Ireland and we can't ship internationally this
Oh,
prize.
man,
was
what
that?
a ripoff.
It really is. Okay, so we have.
Sorry, I moved to the States.
I kind of like the awe in films versus
Sure.
games. Do you like that one?
Yeah.
That's from Jake Z.
An interesting phenomenon, if you will.
Absolutely. So
That
Jake
real
Z,
life is not as interesting as video games. For some reason.
Phenomena.
There we go. So Jake Z will send you out something real nice. And that's it for emails, everybody.
It went so fast.
It really did.
I'm kind of sad it's over.
So stay tuned. We have Ocean Quigley from Maxis coming up, talking all about Simcopter, which I care about maybe too much, and kind of the evolution of SimCity and the development of The Sims, all sorts of great stuff. So stay tuned for that. Ocean Quigley, welcome to the Game Informer Show, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us, man. It's a real honor. I feel like on this podcast, we've had a lot of developers as guests on, and we've tried to corner a lot of the market, but we have not really touched on Maxis yet.
Cool.
And you are an ideal person to talk about Maxis and their role in the industry. So thanks for joining us,
I was
man.
there for almost 20 years or so. Yeah, in the ballpark of 20 years.
Wow, how many other people were there for that long?
Not too many. I mean, actually, I outlasted Will Wright himself.
Oh my God, no one outlasts right. Well, let's cover a little bit of your history later on, but for now, I'm curious as what your life is like. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see his wonderful art studio in the background. But I'm curious, just walk us through your day, man. What are you up to these days?
So I've got a new project I'm working on with some dudes from Maxis and elsewhere. So I spend a chunk of the day just doing 3D modeling and doing design and writing code. And then this is a painting studio with lots of paintings of naked people around, and so I have models come out here and paint for a chunk of the day as well. So it's pretty evenly split between fine art, painting stuff, and game dev stuff.
And which one's the moneymaker and which one's the passion project?
Oh, they both they both do okay. I have a gallery in San Francisco that shows my paintings, and they sell. And the new game, Atomic Space Command, is still in development, so we're not making any money from it right now. We're basically just developing it, and it'll be a while before it actually pays any bills. So it's not as uneven a split as you might imagine.
Okay. So I saw right when you left Maxis, you're starting to work on an iOS project, Jelly Grade?
Yeah. So we, a couple guys and I did a sort of some experiments in fluid simulation games, fluid simulation and life simulation stuff. We did that for maybe 9 months or so, and there was sort of creative differences among the two engineers that I was working with, and so that fell apart. And so then I went and did a bunch of consulting stuff with Maxis again, and then left back in September to do this new game, Atomic Space Command.
And so what's the pitch for Atomic Space Command? What's going on here?
Oh, that's pretty straightforward. That's a game where you and your buddies construct a ship together collaboratively. So it's like a build out that you do with other people online, or by yourself if you want to, and then you fly it into combat as a crew. So you and the other people on your ship are a team, duking it out in an arena, or fighting against the AI, or fighting against other players, either in like full co-op mode where you're on your ship and your friends are on your ship and there's other ships that have people on them, or you're duking it out against red team versus blue team stuff. So you might have a bunch of ships with people on red team and a bunch of ships with people on blue team, and that mixes maybe some Artemis Bridge stuff and some FTL stuff and some sim stuff, but it's more arcadey than any of those. You're kind of flying around and dodging and shooting stuff and laying mines, and there's a kind of a base construction aspect as well.
Yeah, I saw you're kind of terraforming planets or just building bases on planets.
It's
What's going
more
on
like
there?
you're building bases on them. So you basically fly around. You claim we've got a little dynamic solar system, a solar system model. So the sun's in the middle and all the planets are in orbit and there's moons, and you're basically flying around the solar system and grabbing planets, putting down essentially bases on them, like domes and resource extractors and turrets and reactors to power the whole thing. And the game's kind of a capture the flag sort of game. In the solar system, you're trying to grab planets from the other team. The other team is trying to grab planets from you, and you're building on those planets to get the war materials to carry out the effort. But it's got some simulation aspects to it. There's like little base simulation, and there's a ship simulation going on as well.
Nice.
So that's what we're working on.
So what's it like to work on a small team again?
You kind of get in a big team. You have a lot of bureaucracy, but you also have a lot of amplification. Like you come up with a design, and you can throw a dozen artists at it, and there's a whole infrastructure in place for doing things at scale, which is kind of exciting as a creator, because you can see the things that you do really take shape quickly. When you're part of a really small team, there's like 4 or 5 of us on this project, man, you're doing it all. Like I'm writing shaders and I'm doing 3D modeling and I'm doing design. And if I'm not doing any 3D modeling, nobody's doing any 3D modeling, so the whole thing is a much more kind of hands-on. You have all the control, which is the nice side, and you're not answerable to any producers or anybody who's holding the purse strings, but you also have no amplification. Whatever you do is what you're going to do.
Is it invigorating or just a pain in the ass to have that much control again?
Oh, it's both. There's times when you really want to just be able to scale, just have people that you can say, okay, here's the design for a bunch of chassis for ships. I'd like to have just all these built. Here's designs for a whole bunch of different life support systems and a whole bunch of different blasters. Let's just build all these. And so that's something that I miss. But on the other side, you get to make it exactly what you want to make it like. So there's a lot of artistic control that comes with that.
Do you feel more control and there's more self-expression going on in Atomic Space Command than most or all of the projects at Maxis?
I was lucky at Maxis on games like Spore and SimCity and The Sims. I had a lot of creative authorship, so I think those were unusually good situations for a sort of a creative designer to participate in. So not necessarily. The large scale vision of those games was obviously way more collaborative than just sort of me and another guy trying to figure out what we're doing. But in the domain of the stuff that we're working on, for SimCity, the buildings looked pretty much like I wanted them to look, or in Spore, the sort of the creature parts and the creature designs were kind of what I wanted them to be. So I can't really complain about not having creative authorship in those, because it was a pretty good deal.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I'm glad you guys are hitting what seems like a good market for Steam, which is kind of nitty gritty space, ship design, combat stuff. But did you ever consider, because it must have crossed your mind, doing something that was a Kickstarter, something in the vein of The Sims? I mean, you have such an amazing pedigree, and to not rally up support from that is interesting.
Yeah, it seemed like it was better to try and do something new, not just sort of ride on the pedigree of previous accomplishments.
That makes you very unique in the game industry.
Yeah. Well, it's you only have one go around, right? So you might as well try and do exciting new things every time you have a chance. And I don't think I know I was just not that excited about trying to do a clone of SimCity or The Sims. I wanted to sort of make something new, take a whole bunch of new ingredients and combine them in a new way. Which isn't to say I'll never. Sort of building model worlds is really exciting stuff for me. I really like it a lot. So that's stuff that I might get back into at some point. But for now, it's toy solar systems and ship battles in those solar systems.
That's nice. You're an artist, Ocean. This is what you do: is you make new stuff.
Exactly.
Do you want to just go back in time and talk about what it was like when you first walked into Maxis, what year it was, what the studio vibe was like?
Sure. I joined Maxis in '95, and so SimCity 2000 had shipped. And in fact, I got to know Will and the people working at Maxis because I was working for Pruma Publishing, which was the company that did hint guide books back in the '90s.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did I worked on the hint guide book for SimCity 2000, and I really got into SimCity 2000 a lot. I played a lot of SimCity 2000, and I realized after a while that there was a whole new really cool thing that these guys were doing, and that it would be much more fun to actually work on making those things than it would be to sort of write hint guides about them and make hint books about them.
That's a fascinating place to start, because then you just know their design philosophy inside and out, because you have to break it all down.
You really have to understand it pretty well to write the books on it. So I started there, and they put me to work on. I'd been doing 3D stuff, and back in the 90s, this is going to make me sound like a really old person. Back in the 90s, that was kind of exotic. People were using deep paint to do most of the art. It was still largely sprite-based game world, and I'd always been kind of a techie sort of artist, and so I'd gotten my hands on really early 3D programs like Sculpt 3D and Swivel 3D and 3D Studio Release 2 and Release 3. And so I'd built up a portfolio of really interesting now it would be laughable, but for the time it was really impressive 3D stuff. And I was able to take it to Maxis and say, hey, you guys are eventually going to want to move to 3D, and I already know how to do all this stuff. So they gave me a job, like pretty much was a 24-year-old. It was kind of a kid, and did work on a lot of games that you've never heard of. Worked on this game called Full Tilt Pinball, which Maxis published, that we did it was in Windows 95 default for a while.
Okay. Wait, is that the space themed one?
Yeah, there was a space one.
Okay, totally got it. Yep.
Yeah, it's a long time ago. And then Will had me I worked on the Sega Saturn port of SimCity 2000, and then new games like Streets of SimCity and SimCopter. And so at the time, everybody was still kind of buzzed off of the success of SimCity 2000, and we're trying to figure out all the other things that you could do with it. And then I worked on SimCity 3000, which was going to be the major kind of reboot of SimCity after SimCity 2000, but that project was really confused. People wanted to make it a fully sort of 3D world that you could explore at ground level, but this was before 3D cards were a thing, and the machines were nowhere near capable of doing that. You know, it was a decade or maybe even 20 years ahead of its time to do it the fidelity that we wanted to do.
But what about like a SimCopter then? I mean, you could get on the ground and explore that in a 3D environment.
Yes, but SimCopter wasn't really a city simulation. You know, in SimCopter you took your city that you'd built out of that you'd built by playing SimCity 2000, and you flew around in it as a static environment. You know, so we put pedestrians and cars and stuff like that. SimCopter is famous, of course, for the Easter egg. I don't know if you know about
I
it.
wanted to hear that story. Yeah, can you please tell our listeners what this Easter egg is all about?
Right. So we had a programmer, Jacques, who actually has since gone on to be pretty famous. He started a group called the Yes Men, but that's a different story. Okay. So he was a programmer, and he thought it would be pretty funny if on his birthday, when you successfully landed your helicopter after having done all these missions, you know, there's a brass band, a police brass band that welcomes you, and the mayor gives you a speech and stuff like that, and it was kind of like the big victory celebration. So he thought that on his birthday there'd be a slim chance that instead of seeing kind of like the brass band dressed all in their police blues, they'd all kind of just be sort of Chippendale dancers with flashing nipples.
It's basically just like Party Boy from Jackass, just like filling this crude 3D city with party boys.
And man, the graphics were, I mean, it was really crude. The people looked like they were made of pipe cleaners. I mean, I don't want to give you the impression this is all photorealistic. So yeah, you had kind of a party boy scene when you landed, and the mayor was sort of there with his flashing nipples, and so, but Jacques wasn't a great programmer, so his random number generator, instead of basically making this show up once every 10,000 hours of play, would make it show up every 8 hours of play, something like that.
Well, I'm glad that it's so well known for this bizarre Easter egg and whatnot, but I loved SimCopter back in the day. Do you think it gets enough credit as being, I don't know, would you consider it a pioneer in kind of the open world genre?
It was a first experiment in that. Calling it a pioneer maybe overstates it, but it was a stab in that direction. We wanted to make a world like this sort of SimCity scale world that you could fly around and do stuff in. And the computers at the time were not really, it was a stretch. Like this was after we released SimCopter, the first generation of 3D cards came out, and they were still pretty terrible, but they blew our minds with how much better they were than with just doing everything in software, doing straight up software rendering. And so that was like, wow, you could actually make these textures smoothed and not crawly and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's so fun because I have such great memories of that game, and of course just trying to get like the attack helicopter and all that stuff. And then I go back and look at it. That protagonist is one of the most charmingly janky things I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you were on the art team, right? Did you guys have like amazing concept art of what this guy looked like, and then in game it just becomes this blobby blur mess?
Well, actually, one thing that's kind of interesting there is that that the system that Will came up with, along with Jacques, for doing the people, which, and the people were kind of just balls and pipe cleaners. They look terribly crude and simple, but that system actually gave rise to The Sims. So a bunch of the stuff that Will and Jacques figured out about, like, hey, here's little people, and we'll think about how they're going to move around and stuff like that. That was sort of Will's first stab or first experiment at The Sims as a like something that you'd play with. So there were later experiments, and none of that code from SimCopter probably made it into The Sims. But that was the sort of the first turn of the crank with having people be something that you'd simulate and play with.
Yeah.
And SimCopter was just the first place that Will thought, well, we'll toss them in there and see how they work.
See how they work. God, I just remember picking up so many people in SimCopter and then having the back of my helicopter filled with all those heartbeeps. And I remember even like picking up dogs and then they'd show up as people when they're in the helicopter.
Yeah,
it was
that's
such
true.
a bizarre game.
I mean, that was, keep in mind, those games like those there was like probably like 5 of us that worked on it. You know, they game teams were tiny back in that day.
Atomic
you know?
Space Command size.
Yeah, exactly. Like the size of small little groups.
God, what was the most challenging part about developing it?
All the 3D stuff had to be handwritten, right? I mean, this is sort of before you had 3D engines that you could buy off the shelf that have hardware acceleration, that have sort of texture pipelines and all that. So it all had to be hand rolled. Like, that's one of the things that's kind of interesting comparing it to Atomic Space Command and modern projects. Like now it's so easy. You just get Unity or get Unreal and it's off the shelf and it all kind of works. And the 3D modeling tools are really sophisticated and you got plenty of artists that know how to use them. And so it's pretty straightforward to slam together something that's impressive. But back in the day with SimCopter and Streets of SimCity, which was another one that was kind of in that using that same engine.
Also love it.
Man, we just had to do it all from scratch. Everything had to be written in pretty low level code. You had to shave every polygon off. I mean, we wound up making those helicopters out of, they're 200 polygon helicopters. So everything has this sort of folded origami quality to it. So trying to get anything that was not, just awful in those poly counts with performance was really hard. We could live in a golden age now by comparison, looking back at it. Of course, it was all super exciting at the time because it wasn't sprites. It was like, this was fully 3D. Look, you can change the camera. And that was a big deal.
Are you nostalgic about those days? Do you ever go back and try and play the game on an old computer or boot up YouTube videos or anything?
I do every now and then, and I'm kind of appalled with how terrible they look. Because in my memory, they kind of look like they were sort of exciting and novel, and they have a lot of the wonder of that early experimental day. But now you compare it to any modern game that looks stunning, and man, it looks like it was whittled, out of wood.
Out of crude polygons. I mean, it is really impressive. I remember it blowing my mind back in the day, thinking that you could import your cities from SimCity 2000 into Streets of SimCity and SimCopter, because I remember my friends had SimCity 2000 and then we'd share these copies and try and like interconnect those worlds. It was mind blowing. Yeah,
that was pretty magical. Like that was something people had wanted to do from SimCity 2000 on. Like you make your city and now you want to see what it's like to be down in the city, to get down, at street level and look around and see the life of the city. So Streets of SimCity and SimCopter were the first ones to try and give you some approximation of that. The worlds just weren't alive enough or robust enough or rich enough down at ground level to really pay off on that. So it was good as long for SimCopter, for example. It was good as long as you were sort of flying around at skyscraper level. But as soon as you got down to ground level, not so much.
Don't look, the horror. Look away, Marion. Well, let's focus on ground level then stuff with Sims. That's coming up a couple years later. I mean, we've heard the stories and the legends about how that game started. Did it feel monumental during development? Did you feel like this was something new?
Oh, no, it felt like it was another one of... I mean, the weird thing about working with Will Wright is that you never know... I mean, all of his ideas sound terrible. And you never know, like, if they're terrible brilliant or if they're terrible. Like, The Sims was one of those ones that was like, this was just really stupid. Like, the game was just not like, who wants to play this? And it was really nothing for a long time. And then all of a sudden... it flipped and it became magical. And it was, I have to give Will a lot of credit for that because he was pretty much pushing the thing himself in the face of a lot of skepticism from kind of the larger Maxis studio and from other people on the team. And it wasn't until he'd pushed it pretty far that people went, oh, and even then we brought it to E3 and we didn't have a big booth. I mean, we were sort of nestled into the larger EA booth with a handful of monitors. Like it was not a big, it wasn't a big splash. And and it kind of stole the show, even though the signs were small and there were just a handful of monitors, but it was just this weird, fresh thing that came in.
Was it?
But no, it was not obvious that it was going to be. We thought that it would sell a few 100,000 copies and people would dig it, and it would be another interesting little Will project. The fact that it kind of ate the world was a surprise to us.
How much of that do you think was it expanding so well into a wider audience? Like, I think a majority of Sims fans that I know are women. Was that something?
In retrospect, yeah, but it had to initially appeal to your kind of core game market. Like when the game first came out, if core gamers didn't find a game there, then they would never tell their girlfriends, or their little sisters would never find it. So like you couldn't just reach that market directly. You had to actually have a game that had some strategy and had some hardcore game mechanics against it, so that so the guys would play it. They'd play it for a week or two. They get kind of bored with it, and then their little sister would pick it up, or their girlfriend would pick it up. But yeah, no question. In retrospect, it was appealing to people who would never really play games otherwise.
Was it when it clicked over into everybody agreeing like this is working well? Was it when things were a little bit more gamified, to use that dumb term?
It was a bunch of things. The environments got richer. There was game progression, and you kind of knew what you wanted to do at the next stage. You as a player said, well, I want to try and get this couch, or I want to try and get a promotion. So there were game things to do. Enough of the simulation came into place that you could start projecting all the inner life of the Sims and the emotional relationships between the Sims. And then there was stuff the stuff that I worked on was mostly like the build mode and the neighborhood stuff. So I can't actually take any credit at all for the core of the Sims. The stuff that I worked on was like, okay, let's figure out how we're going to make walls and porches and roofs. And how the neighborhood is all going to work as a place.
Please tell me when you were developing that and coding it that you at least had the peaceful piano soundtrack that was eventually in the game
Yes.
to help you be motivated going through it.
Yeah, the audio design for Maxis games was pretty consistent for a long time. Like there was a kind of a Maxis style. Like for SimCity 4, we went with kind of a lot of the sort of Gershwin kind of 1940s, 1950s American music sounds, and it wasn't at all your kind of 8 Mile soundtrack. It was a much more kind of, oh, this is nice, I want to be here kind of thing.
Oh, it's amazing. Look, I ran into Chris Tilton at E3 last year, and he was the composer for SimCity 2013,
Right.
which was by a mile my favorite soundtrack from that year.
Yeah, it was a really good soundtrack, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. And he was talking about how he had so much feedback from other programmers saying that when they were programming other game developers, they would always listen to SimCity 2013 soundtrack because it has like this inspirational driving tone that's so
there's
rare.
something kind of interesting about SimCity 2013 where the simulation actually had was on a clock. So we had a frequency that the simulation ticked forward at. And I forget what it was, but just for the sake of argument, let's say that it was 4 times per second, for example.
Okay.
And so I realized that there's this kind of like a beat to the whole city. The simulation is going to tick at this frequency. That means that like lights are going to turn off and on at that frequency. That means like the street lights are going to turn at that frequency. It means that like basically the whole world operates at that tick, tick, tick. And so I asked Chris to put music onto that beat so that basically there'd be this sort of drive of the music that would line up with the drive of the simulation. So if you look at it, I even made it so that the little Sims, the walking footprints of the Sims are on the beat. So there's this whole consistent drive to the city. And our music designer, we had our lead audio designer for SimCity is a guy named Kent Jolly. He was like, I have to fade this beat back at times or we'll drive people mad. It'll just be so obnoxious. And I'm like, no, it must be on all the time.
It must be one big music video.
I even made it so that the the poofs of smoke coming out of smokestacks were on the beat. But then Kent actually succeeded in like, okay, there's just gonna be times when the beat goes away and there's just gonna be washes of sound.
It can't be Steamboat Willie for 100 hours.
Exactly. And I have some sympathy for that.
Sure.
I thought it was neat to keep it all metronomic, but
So
Whatever.
jumping back to Sims working on the neighborhood stuff, how influential were you in designing Mortimer Goth and that weirdo's house?
Not at all. Like I just did the systems, you know. So
Okay.
I worked out like, okay, here's how floors work, or here's how swimming pools work, and these are sort of tile sets, and these are the draw operations, and here's how you snapshot the lot and embed it into a larger landscape and stuff like that. So I was kind of a art systems guy, and the sort of the character design, the character activity, the sort of the narrative life of The Sims. That was all like Chris Trottier and Connor Ryan. I mean, there were a whole bunch of designers that were sort of engaged with that and that did all that work. So yeah, that wasn't my. I can't take any credit for that.
Gotcha. And this is a weird running theme, but I'm piecing it all together now between your artwork and then Simcopter. But with The Sims, maybe it's just because I was 12 years old when it came out, but how much were you guys fascinated by the obsession on the internet with nude codes for The Sims? I take it you must have talked about it a lot, right?
So it was one of those things that you just sort of like. I'd say I was more surprised by when we did Spore, and we thought, well, you know, you could make some jiggly stuff in Spore, sure, if you want to, you know, but that's no big deal. And then it turned out to be the thing, you know, the thing that everybody remembers about Spore was all the crazy penis monsters, and so the nude codes on The Sims were like, oh yeah, whatever, you know, but people are people. That's kind of stuff that they're going to look for. But man, I was blown away by the repulsive creativity of our fan base when it came to Spore. Like the first week that it came out, we all just sort of watched the new creatures people were making come in, because we had like the network side of it. So you know, hit refresh and there'd be another 1,000 creatures, you know, on the in the encyclopedia, and we're like, oh my God, can you believe this? And of course we officially as EA we had to frown on it and delete them and stuff like that. But as developers, we were like, you guys are awesome. Oh my God.
Just porn planets. Welcome to Sex World.
Exactly. And, you know, we did all this procedural animation stuff for Spore too. So, you know, little creatures would dance around, and we had all the soft body dynamics. And soft body dynamics, we thought, you know, it'll make tails wiggle and stuff like that. And it did make tails wiggle.
Indeed it did. Jesus Christ. Well, not to keep on this pervy theme, but let's keep it rolling. How involved were you guys with Sims Online and what that eventually became?
So again, for me, I was just doing the kind of the art system mechanics. You know, how you piece together buildings into larger environments. I helped Will out with some of the social graph stuff. Like we did a bunch of visualizations for social graph stuff. But by and large, on the art side and on the art system side, Sims Online just borrowed stuff that we'd already figured out from The Sims. So there wasn't that much for me to do other than help Will out with some design visualizations.
My mile-high perspective, I never played Sims Online, I'm sorry. I wish I did, but my mile-high perspective was that it wasn't long before it all just turned into some creepy sex chat room. Is that what happened to that? What's going on?
At that point, I'd already switched over to work. I guess I'd already started working on SimCity 4.
Okay.
So I was like, yeah, they're doing that stuff over on that side of the building, and I don't actually know that much about it. I kind of get the sense that that's like, if you look at Second Life, for example, that's just the natural end state of online communities. That's the basin that they all fall into. But
Yeah, I think all games, even like The Witness, just turned into some just sex dungeon now. You can't stop it. But let's talk about like the Maxis aesthetic. When do you feel like that came online? And is it an oversimplification just to be like, oh, kind of pastel, peaceful, clean colors?
No, there is definite Maxis aesthetic, and it kind of came from Will's sensibility. Like it was there in SimCity 2000, and then we developed it and pushed it further with The Sims and SimCity 4 and SimCity 3000 and The Sims 2 and onto Spore, and it was just a shared sensibility among the people that made the games there. Like we were sort of self-consciously making games that weren't kind of your roid raged Space Marine kind of thing. They were games that were much more software toys than they were traditional games. In fact, that I don't know if you know what the Maxis logo looks like, but there's kind of like a crescent moon kind of thing. And that was actually supposed to be a ball to give you the sense of it's a toy. It's like a ball that you bounce, and you can do a million things with a ball. So I think that sensibility comes from just the sensibility of people making what we wanted to be, engaging, charming, delightful toys that had games, that had game mechanics driving them, but at heart were toys, were things that you wanted to play with. And there were also games that were all object-based. So, you had libraries of components, and you'd put them down and interact with them and rearrange them in a multitude of different ways. So you think of like buildings in SimCity, there are thousands of buildings, and you have tools for putting them down and picking them up and manipulating them. Or if you think of all the furniture in The Sims, or all the creature parts in Spore. And so there's a certain style that we came up with about kind of clarity and simplicity of these objects that modularly interact with all the other objects. And that drove a bunch of what we did as well.
Do you feel like there's a real sense of pride about being so different in the industry? Do you feel like as a collective unit, you guys were proud of the fact that we aren't Space Marine garbage?
Yeah, we were. We were doing stuff that we could tell our parents about.
Maybe not Sims Online, but other than that, check it out, folks.
Don't go there. Yeah, but we were doing games that had kind of a wit and sophistication to them. Obviously now the sort of the game space is so huge, and there's people making all sorts of games, from incredibly sophisticated to incredibly crude and so forth. That's great. But at the time, you have to keep in mind, the industry was much, much smaller. And we were we'd staked out a sort of a style and a sensibility. And it was just who we were. I don't even know if we were proud of it or not proud of it. This was just the sort of thing that we did.
Yeah. It's interesting. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but speaking to other people who've worked at Maxis before, they always talk about, Will Wright being heralded as a genius, but it's like, well, it's important to point out, though, there's a real batting average situation. Like, Maxis cranked out more games than anybody really remembers, and the ones that hit huge, but there are so many experiments out there. Do you want to talk about that nature a little bit?
Well, that's kind of what I was saying earlier. With the thing with Will is that all his ideas sound terrible. Like initially they sound terrible. You're like a game where you're managing a planet, ecosystems, it's a terrible idea. Even SimCity, he had a hard time getting, this was before my time, he had a hard time getting going because there was no game there. It was just a toy city. But the thing that was remarkable was that, like, you couldn't really tell if they really were terrible until, like, well into the project. And games like SimCity and The Sims turned into sort of cultural touchstones. And then games like Spore, for example, were kind of a swing and a miss, but had elements of that magic to them. They didn't ever quite come together and become sort of coherent, beautiful objects like SimCity and The Sims did, but they had elements of magic to them. And then there's ones, that like SimAt is kind of interesting. You kind of play with it for a bit. SimEarth, kind of interesting. SimCopter, kind of interesting. That's the thing with Will and with Maxis, was, at least for a chunk of them, they were experimental. Trying to find something, trying to strike out into new territory and find some new stuff to do. And you don't always, when you're not just going by the formula, you don't always know what you're going to find. And so sometimes you think, well, this seems terrible, and it is terrible. But sometimes you come over the hill and there's sort of, El Dorado over there.
So I think people familiar with Will Wright will just think that, I'd imagine every time he speaks, it's like one of his GDC talks where your mind's going to be blown. There's so many brilliant theories out there. And I'm curious, what's it like to actually work with the man?
So, it sort of, I've worked with him for so long that it's hard to answer that question in a single, on some projects he's really engaged in his prototyping stuff with you and is really on. In other projects, he's kind of like, he shows up and he kind of like swirls around and then he leaves, you know. So it sort of just depends on the project. But that said, he's kind of a crazy genius. Like he's one of the smartest people I've ever worked with, and draws connections between things, finds inspiration for games and things that you wouldn't think are promising ground for inspiration at all.
Yeah. I remember something that always stuck with me is in one of his talks somewhere, he was talking about game design versus physics. I'm sure it was associated with Spore. And he made the comparison saying that physics is taking the infinite possibilities of the universe and boiling it down to a certain code or a certain, set of numbers and equations, so to speak. And then game design is the exact opposite of that.
Right. Yeah. So and we talked about this a bunch, Will and I. Like you could look at physics as essentially a compression algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you have this super complicated world out here with, rain falling and planets in orbit and stuff like that, and you want to express that in the most succinct formula possible, right? So it's massive data compression, and then with game design and world creation, you want to create a system that expands to give you a world that you can interact with, and with game design, especially the kind of games we did as well, a big chunk of it is giving the player a system that's rich enough that they can then use their own imaginations with. So it wasn't trying to fill in all the detail. It was to give the player enough detail that they would then bring their own personalities and imaginations to the project and engage with it as a result.
And which game do you think best captured that throughout your time at Maxis?
They all did it in various ways. I was going to say the biggies, The Sims, of course. Like in The Sims, in the first one, we were astounded by how much players would project into the mental lives of the Sims. Like the actual sort of state machines and artificial intelligence that we'd written for the Sims were really simple, and people gave them way more sophistication and read way more into their relationships and their mental states than was actually there. But the same with SimCity. It's those, like the first SimCity was basic cellular automata style simulation, really basic, and people would interpret what was going on in the light of their own experience and project a whole bunch onto that. And then the same with Spore. We saw all these crazy stories that people would make. All these they'd use Spore's creatures and vehicles and architecture editors as sort of jumping off points for the stories that they wanted to tell. So it's they all the successful ones succeeded in different ways at doing that, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, with Spore specifically, I'm curious. It seems like people are bringing it up a lot again in reference to No Man's Sky.
Right.
Are you following No Man's Sky? Do you have any thoughts on the comparison between those two games?
Well, I think this is a. So I think that the engineering and math behind the world creation in No Man's Sky kind of blows the doors off of our procedural world creation. I mean, not to be too blunt about it, but I've been just really impressed with the procedural planet creation and procedural distribution of flora and features on those planets. Those look really, really good. And our stuff was, by contrast, sort of half-baked. But the main thing that Spore brought to the table was sort of the player creativity. Like you had all these tools for creating pretty sophisticated things, sophisticated vehicles, pretty sophisticated creatures, seeing them move around. And so with Spore, ultimately the thing that it gives you was it amplified your creativity. It let you start with something fairly simple and wind up with something that was kind of magical and that you didn't know you could make. And No Man's Sky seems like it's a vastly better sort of universe creation, or created universe, procedurally created universe, but it doesn't really have that player expressivity, baked into it. So there's similar claims for scale and endless experience and stuff like that. So there's definitely overlap, but I think the core things that the two different projects brought, one in the case of Spore, it was look at the amazing things you'll be able to make and sorry, you can't actually do all that much with them, but look at the amazing things you get to make. And then in No Man's Sky, it's look at the amazing places you'll get to go and explore.
Yeah.
And there's somewhat different sort of philosophies behind it. I've been really impressed with the art style and the sophistication of the worlds that they've been able to create procedurally.
Yeah, I actually, visiting Hello Games over there in England for a cover story a while back, I asked them the exact question about Spore in comparisons, and of course they were unbelievably humble, which is their MO over there, I think. But Sean Murray's like, oh, please, like Spore is a brilliant piece of game design and procedural animation, and I really liked it. And he's like, when the big book on video game procedural animation is written, or procedural generation, he's like, I hope we have like a footnote in the chapter that's devoted to Spore. So that's where they're coming from.
That's way too humble in his case. Like the way that they've solved their problems around like making an infinite variety of creatures and infinite variety of planets is pretty impressive. Like as somebody who's had obviously was in the thick of it with Spore, I have a more than casual interest in the way that they did it, and I was impressed with the artistic control that they were able to get. In our case, we wound up having to sacrifice a whole lot of artistic control because we were giving the players the ability to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in retrospect, we gave the players so much control that it was difficult for us to sort of make a challenging game experience around it, right? Because we said, hey, here you go. Here's all these wonderful tools for creating things, but it was hard to reason about the things that were created after the fact and make a kind of a tight, structured game experience. It's my hope that by maintaining more control, No Man's Sky's long-term play experience will be better as a result.
What was it like inside the company after Spore released? Because outside of the afterglow of hype, I played it and really had a great time with it. But I'm just curious, was EA knocking on the door every day being like, sweet Jesus, we need to make our money back on this thing. Let's make Dark Spore, get it out the door.
I mean, we were after Spore, so we did some expansion packs. We made more creature parts and stuff like that, and it made a chunk of money. I didn't pay that much attention at the time because it wasn't my responsibility for how much money they made back, but they did okay with it. You know,
Okay.
It wasn't a financial disaster for them, and the Maxis studio then kind of like, well, I guess we'll do something else now. You know, like
Moving on.
moving exactly.
Do you want to talk a little bit about SimCity 2013's development?
Sure.
Maybe just focusing on EA again. Like, what were EA's marching orders with the new SimCity, and how much of that came from Maxis within?
So the initial thing was we wanted to do another SimCity. There'd been a couple other sort of SimCity-ish, SimCity societies that had been done by other studios in the interim, and we thought that all the technology had finally gotten to the point where we could make a proper 3D SimCity. Because if you look at SimCity 4, it was isometric. I mean, we wound up building a 3D engine to render all the sprites, but the camera was locked. So even though there was 3D geometry there, you could never move the camera down into it. And so we thought that the technology had finally gotten to the point where you could make reasonable looking architecture and reasonable looking buildings. And so it came out of a sort of desire to revisit SimCity as a world, right? As a place that you could kind of fly around, and there's kind of so there were a bunch of sort of visuals that I wanted to see. You know, I wanted to see the sort of the model railroad landscapes of my childhood, you know, like stuff building in my grandmother's basement, you know, brought to life in a really sophisticated way.
And was a tilt shift look part of that early design?
That was the tilt shift look, and the and it's maybe a little hard to describe, but there's sort of an exaggeration and a amplification of a bunch of features in SimCity. Like the buildings were sort of compressed and expanded in different ways, so that like the doors and the windows would be more prominent. So we tried to take everything to make it sort of really interesting. So everything was interesting to look at, you know, and everything was kind of exciting to look at. So we initially, a bunch of us at Maxis said, let's try and put together a sort of a rough prototype and a pitch for how this could work. And after a while, he said, okay, you guys can do that. And the the considerations were that they wanted to make it, EA wanted to make it a more of a platform, an ongoing platform that they sort of build and develop on, and so that mandated the kind of the server and online stuff, which in retrospect, I mean, obviously was the fatal flaw in it.
Yeah. Were you personally excited about that stuff, or was it just like, well, I guess we have to put this in here?
Well, so it was stuff we had to do, and then the problem was, how do we make it so that it actually gives the player some value, right? Like if you say, well, this is the way the system, these are constraints the system has to solve for, then how do you solve them in a way that that makes the game more interesting, as opposed to a way that's just a straitjacket. And so that's when we thought, well, there's all kinds of interesting stuff you can do with cities in the context of other cities, and cities in the context of the larger environment around them. like where your water comes from, where your labor force comes from, where do homeless people go? What's the does crime in a neighboring city affect your city? If you want to have a garden city and you have a neighboring city that's generating lots of power, could you shunt the pollution over to that city and keep all the power for yourself? So there are interesting sort of design space possibilities that are opened up by the requirement for it to always be online. But obviously, it would have been nicer if those were optional. If you'd say like, hey, yeah, these are all things if you want to play online, you can do, but if you don't.
Is the push from EA for that stuff just so that players are one step closer to microtransactions, or what's the idea there for pushing so much for online?
I think at the time it was sort of, EA just saw this as the future. Like, this is just how things are going to be. Like that you'll have an always online, always connected game world, and let's use SimCity to push into that glorious vision of the future. So microtransaction selling content, absolutely, it was part of it, but it was more to sort of make a sort of a living online world out of the whole thing that would just always be there. The tech got ahead of itself. We didn't have the back end infrastructure to actually pull that off. Obviously, it was the meltdown when we actually had a million people pile in was just appalling, at the time.
Yeah, what is it like to go into the office every day when the outside world is losing its mind trying to play this game?
Yeah. Well, it was grim. I mean, we were pretty happy with the actual game, the game part of the game, the way that it looked, the stuff that you could do. I mean, there was stuff that needed iteration and polishing. Game went out a little earlier than it should have, but nevertheless, like, I thought the game was pretty beautiful. Like, the stuff that I was worried about, like, is the terrain fun to play with? Was it fun to draw roads? Do the buildings tell you what's going on? Can you look at all the little people and imagine the activities in life of the city? Like, there was a lot of magic going on there.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And so the back end of it all sort of collapsing in flaming server rooms was well, it feels a little bit like sort of being somebody on a sinking ship, and you've done a really nice job on your part of it, but like, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you've made all these beautiful things, because the rest of the ship is exploding.
And it's just like the tech department is just people just with 1,000-yard stares. They've been up for 3 days. Like, is that what it's like?
There was a bunch of that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
That I didn't, for the most part, personally have to engage that much with that, because it was like, I'm not a back-end server engineer and don't kind of have to deal with allocating all these server resources and figuring out where the bottlenecks are and stuff like that. So at my level, I'm like, what's going on, guys? Like, can we let players in now?
Can people like our game yet?
And so that was pretty hard, as a designer, having built something that was, I thought, pretty wonderful, pretty magical, and then no, you can't play it. No, that's not for you.
Yeah, I really love SimCity 2013. Like, I mean, obviously the size of the cities was an issue, but I mean, for like those 5 or so hours where you're building up to that limit, I thought obviously the art, the music, my God, the music, and just the way that it rolled out the systems to you was so clean and so wonderful.
Yeah. I think a lot of things went right with that project. If the sort of rollout hadn't been so calamitous, then it would have been straightforward enough to build out larger cities, for example. And the eventual vision was that the whole region, the whole vast, 32 kilometer by 32 kilometer region would be one potential city, and you could build anywhere in it. Like the whole thing was going to be there's just a landscape, and you can build a city over here, and then scroll over here and build a city over there, and then connect the two of them together.
And that was the plan post launch, or that was the plan initially?
That sort of before we launched. My design intent there was to expand the cities until they eventually abutted each other.
Gotcha.
And then you just have a huge connected landscape to build in. But after the launch, it was like, well, maybe not.
I don't think it's gonna be possible. So it's just the tech just couldn't live up to the dreams.
Yeah, the back ends basically it was the back end server stuff, like the simulation engine with more powerful computers and more memory would have let us scale eventually to larger and larger cities until eventually the whole region could be one vast city, and that was sort of the initial design intent behind it, but that never to be.
Oh man, was that the toughest part of your career, do you think?
I'd say that was pretty much the hardest part of my career.
Yeah. I'm sorry if this is a sensitive topic, but was the rise of City Skylines' popularity then the next year, was that a silver lining? Just that this game
that
can
was
still
really cool.
Okay.
Keep in mind, like, I don't own SimCity, right?
Right.
SimCity belongs to EA, and so we threw all this stuff out there, put all this stuff out there for people, and the fact that City Skylines was able to take a whole bunch of the ideas and keep them alive, put them into a new product and get them in front of people is great. I have to admit, I'm looking at some of the data view stuff. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of familiar. Like they took some of it just straight up, but they're welcome to it. As far as I'm concerned, the ideas, you don't own ideas, right? Like you basically make something and you put it out there, and then people pick it up, and if they like it, they do more stuff with it themselves. And I'm all for that.
Did you play a fair amount of City Skylines then?
I played a bunch. I think the gameplay was nice and smooth. The art polish didn't quite do it for me.
Okay.
I'm somebody who's particularly obsessed about like the way things look and the sort of the relationship between the simulation and the visuals.
Yeah.
And the City Skyline stuff didn't quite pull that off for me in the way that I kind of wanted. Yeah. But that said, it's a good game, and I'm happy that they're keeping the torch alight. Is kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah, it's got to be nice. I mean, that game has been really successful, and I'm curious what you think about kind of the other side of the sim genre, which seems like it's free to play iOS stuff. I think SimCity and iOS is doing really well. What do you think about that scene?
I don't actually. I'm old school enough that I'm more of a PC gamer, so I don't actually pay that much attention to the free to play stuff. I kind of like big old elaborate simulation games that I can play on my computer with lots of memory. Yeah. And so I noodle around with Sims free to play and SimCity free to play, but by and large they're not for me.
Sure.
I'm more of a PC gamer.
So looking back at your time at Maxis as a whole, is there anything you think that the public doesn't appreciate enough about Maxis's role in the industry, or about what made Maxis unique?
I think Maxis I think Maxis is they've got a reputation. People know what they did. They had their own particular style. I wish that more people were making Maxis style simulation sandbox, toy box games. Now I wish it was actually a larger part of the industry. It always felt a little separate and boutique-y, from the sort of mainstream industry. And you'd have that sense when you're going to E3 or GDC that the things that we were doing were standing a little bit aside from the sort of the main sort of thrust of the game industry. But I think people liked them. I mean, they were good. They were good games, and they had they got recognized as such. So no, really, I've got no grounds for complaint. It was, we did fun projects and people liked them, and it was a good time.
Yeah, it's really amazing that there hasn't been, and maybe there were around 2000. I just don't remember, but it's amazing that there hasn't been like a City Skylines-esque renaissance for something like The Sims. It seems like the market's right for that.
We've always at Maxis, we were always expecting somebody to come up with a reasonable Sims competitor. Like I mean, there's very few genres where you've only got one game.
Yeah.
That is the genre. But part of it, I think, is that like The Sims is really about kind of domesticity and people's ordinary lives. And I mean, obviously, turned it up to 11, but it's not about orcs and space marines and explosions and stuff like that so much as it is about kind of domestic triumphs and failures and stuff like that. And I think maybe a lot of game developers just aren't interested in that. So part of it is like people just don't want to do that. They want to make games that are more escapist power fantasies or so. This is just speculation on my part. I don't actually know why there haven't been any sort of like full-on AAA competitors to The Sims or full-on like no offense to City Skylines, but why there haven't been any like $10 million, $20 million, $30 million budgeted competitors to SimCity beats me. I will say that those games, those systems-based games, are hard. That they take a real different mindset than games that are more level-based, where you have a character and you can sort of build a level and then kind of run down the level. And
so when so much talent in the industry is used to that developing mind frame, it's tough to shift out.
It's tough to if you haven't ever done systems-based games before, games that are all about thousands of interlocking parts in a simulation that's driving them all, then and you've mostly made levels and made kind of enemy AI that is mostly concerned with strafing and stuff like that, then it's a different mindset and different skill set. So maybe that's it, but I honestly don't know. Some combination of cultural sensibility and some combination of sort of production expertise that makes it hard.
Sure. Well, hey, do you want to give a heads up for when Atomic Space Command is going to be released?
So we were just out at PAX East showing Atomic Space Command, and we've got we're still alpha, pre-alpha-ish. The game's not feature complete. We're letting people play it. I mean, if they go to atomicspacecommand.net, they can just download it and start playing it even now. But it's alpha software, pre-alpha software, so it's going to crash and it's going to be buggy and not feature complete. And I'd say we're still a couple of months away from having a more robust alpha with all the multiplayer stuff working properly. And then we're shooting for a beta, like a feature complete, and most of the bugs ironed out by the end of the year. So it's still a little ways out, but you can grab the build right now. You can build ships. You can snap in reactors and put motors in and put blasters in and load crew members up, and then go play. And depending upon, and we put out new builds every week or two, and so depending upon which build you get, you can either hop online with your friends or not, depending upon if we've broken it this week or not. We're not charging anything for it. I mean, just basically get it and play it and hop on our forums and give us feedback about what you like and what you don't.
It seems like a peaceful life you got going on.
It's pretty fun. Yeah.
Is it stress-free game development these days?
No, because when there's basically just a few of you and you're cranking to put a game out, and you're not making any money until the game actually does come out, it does motivate you to work until midnight.
Yeah. Well, hey, for making money on the other side of things, do you have a plug for where people can look at your paintings, look at your work?
Oh, sure. So people can go to my website, oceanquigley.com, or they can go to I've got a gallery that shows my work, Chloe Gallery. Then just Google Chloe Gallery in San Francisco to see stuff. And if you're in San Francisco, you can see it in person. And then I've got a blog where I stick all kinds of stuff up, both like old stuff from Maxis and paintings and stuff from Atomic Space Command. And that's at oceanquigley.blogspot.com.
Awesome.
That's kind of from back in the day when Blogspot was a thing.
It was huge.
But I've maintained it.
Nice. I've never commissioned artwork, but I'm tempted to get a painting from you and pay you big money for like the Simcopter protagonist in beautiful style, just a giant canvas of that ugly, ugly guy.
That would be really funny.
It'd be your finest work. All right, but hey, Ocean, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you. It was a pleasure chatting with you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Game Informer Show. Be sure to tune in next week, and we'll have a new episode waiting for you. Bye, everybody.